Hey, welcome back. My friend, you're standing beneath the immense stone walls of Windsor Castle in the year 1861, and already the place feels less like a comfortable home and more like something designed to make you reconsider every decision that brought you here. Above you, towers rise into a pale English sky. Flags stir lazily in the wind. Somewhere beyond the gates, horses strike their hooves against stone, carriage wheels grind over the road, and a guard stands with the impressive Victorian ability to look uncomfortable without admitting it. The air smells of damp masonry, horse leather, smoke, and the faint sweetness of burning coal drifting from hundreds of chimneys. You probably will not survive this place with your dignity intact. Not because Windsor is particularly murderous, thankfully, but because you are about to enter a world where opening the wrong door, speaking to the wrong person, or appearing in the wrong corridor at the wrong moment can announce that you have absolutely no idea what you're doing. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you settle beneath the blankets, tell me where in the world you are listening from and what the local time is there. There is something strangely comforting about imagining all those quiet rooms, scattered across different countries, listening together. Now, dim the lights and step through the gates. The first surprise is scale. Windsor Castle is not simply a large house with unusually ambitious walls. By 1861 it's already ancient, with origins stretching back nearly 8 centuries to William the Conqueror and the years following the Norman conquest. Generations of monarchs have expanded, rebuilt, decorated, demolished, and rearranged it. You feel those centuries beneath your feet. The ground rises and falls, passages bend unexpectedly, courtyards open between buildings belonging to different periods. Medieval stonework stands beside later apartments and carefully restored Gothic details. At the centre rises the round tower, perhaps the castle's most recognisable feature. From below, it dominates your view, perched high above the surrounding buildings. But you quickly discover that Windsor is not arranged for your convenience. A modern visitor might expect signs. Royal apartments this way, servants downstairs, tea and biscuits, somewhere sensible. Victorian Windsor offers no such kindness. Instead, knowledge is carried by people. Everyone who belongs here seems to understand invisible boundaries. Servants know which staircases they may use. Officers know where they are expected to appear. Household officials move through particular doors. Visitors are guided along approved routes. Your freedom depends heavily on your rank, and rank is everywhere. This is one of the defining realities of living inside Windsor Castle. The building itself becomes a map of Victorian hierarchy. There are spaces intended for the sovereign and her family, magnificent staterooms used for ceremony and receiving guests, private apartments, offices, guard rooms, kitchens, workshops, servants' rooms, storerooms, stables, religious spaces, and residences connected with the wider castle community. Windsor is therefore both intimate and enormous. Queen Victoria can inhabit it as a family residence, yet hundreds of other lives intersect around her. You hear them before you see them. A door closes somewhere down a passage. Boots cross a courtyard. Metal rattles from a working area. A servant carries something quickly past you without stopping. There are soldiers here too, because Windsor retains its unmistakable military character. Guards and sentries reinforce the curious feeling that you have entered a home where someone has taken household security rather seriously. Then there are the clergy and officials associated with St. George's Chapel. Household employees, craftsmen, stable workers, messengers, tradespeople, and the various figures necessary to keep a royal residence functioning. The castle is almost a small town folded inside fortifications. One quirky detail is that Windsor has long supported communities whose lives are connected to royal service in ways that blur the boundary between palace and neighbourhood. Some people do not merely arrive for work and disappear each evening. Their homes, duties, traditions, and identities can be deeply tied to the castle precincts. Imagine your workplace having 8 centuries of history and armed guards at the entrance. Suddenly your modern office badge seems pleasantly uncomplicated. As you continue inward, the sensory experience changes. Outside, the wind moves freely across the stone. Inside, the atmosphere becomes enclosed. The walls seem to hold smells: wax, wood polish, coal smoke, fabric, old stone, occasionally food. Your footsteps change too. On stone they make sharp little echoes. Across carpets they vanish almost completely. Light is uneven. Some rooms receive generous daylight through tall windows, while passages and internal spaces can feel surprisingly dim. Candles and lamps remain important once daylight fades. While gaslighting is becoming increasingly significant in Victorian buildings, you begin to understand something that paintings rarely communicate. Royal splendour requires maintenance, constant maintenance. Every polished surface represents someone's labour. Every fire must be prepared and fed. Every lamp requires attention. Every corridor must be cleaned. Every meal requires ingredients to arrive, food to be prepared, dishes to be carried, and everything to disappear afterward. The smoother royal life appears, the more labour is hiding behind it. Historians continue to debate exactly how ordinary members of the wider household experienced this environment emotionally. Was royal service primarily regarded as prestigious security, exhausting restriction, or some shifting mixture of both? The answer probably depends on whom you ask. A senior household officer inhabits a very different Windsor from a kitchen worker. A royal child experiences different freedoms from a maid. A visiting aristocrat sees grandeur where a servant may see another long corridor that needs attention, and you begin to realise there is no single Windsor castle. There are many Windsors occupying the same walls. The Queen's Windsor is a family home and seat of monarchy. A servant's Windsor is a workplace governed by bells, schedules, instructions, and rank. A soldier's Windsor is a guarded royal stronghold. A visitor's Windsor is spectacle. A child's Windsor might be a maze of familiar rooms, stern adults, lessons, gardens, dogs, relatives, and distant corners that remain mysterious. Your own Windsor, at least for now, is confusing. You follow a corridor and glimpse a window overlooking the landscape beyond the walls. There, suddenly, the castle's position makes sense. Windsor sits above the surrounding country with commanding views, its towers visible from far away. The River Thames lies below, and beyond the immediate town stretches the greener landscape associated with Windsor Great Park and the royal estate. For centuries, location has been part of the castle's power. Yet in 1861, something distinctly modern is happening beyond those ancient walls. The railway has transformed travel to Windsor. Queen Victoria belongs to the first generation of British monarchs to live comfortably within the railway age. London is no longer separated from Windsor by the same slow uncertainties of road travel that earlier courts endured. The old fortress now exists alongside steam locomotives, telegraphy, expanding newspapers, industrial cities, and an empire connected by increasingly rapid communications. Medieval towers watch over a Victorian world. That contrast follows you everywhere. You might pass beneath stone arches whose foundations belong to a distant age, then encounter clothing, technology, furniture, and routines unmistakably shaped by the 19th century, and somewhere within all this movement is Victoria herself. In 1861 she is 42 years old. She has already been queen for more than 2 decades. Her marriage to Prince Albert has produced 9 children, though several are now approaching adulthood or establishing lives of their own. The royal household remains deeply shaped by the partnership between Victoria and Albert. Nobody walking these corridors at the beginning of the year knows how dramatically that will change before December is over. For now, however, Windsor still breathes according to familiar rhythms. The household moves, doors open and close, messages travel. Meals are prepared, children study, horses wait, guards change duty, fires burn down and are rebuilt, and eventually the daylight weakens. You notice the castle becoming quieter, without ever becoming completely silent. This is another strange reality of living here. The building never entirely sleeps, even when the royal family retires. Somebody remains awake, someone guards an entrance, someone tends a responsibility, someone may be preparing for tomorrow. You are surrounded by hundreds of rooms, yet privacy is complicated. Walls separate people physically, but servants, attendants, family members, officials, and guards are woven into daily existence. Royal life can be luxurious without being solitary. Perhaps that is the first lesson Windsor gives you. Privilege does not necessarily mean freedom. Sometimes privilege simply means the cage has excellent carpets. And as the evening chill begins pressing against those thick old walls, you start wondering how this enormous household manages the most basic problem of tomorrow morning, because before Victoria wakes, before breakfast appears, before polished boots cross grand rooms and respectable Victorian faces present themselves to the day, somebody has to get up first. Quite a lot of somebodies, actually, and their morning begins much earlier than yours. Section 2. Long before the grander rooms begin to stir, you hear the castle waking from somewhere behind its respectable face. It begins quietly, a footstep, then another, a door carefully opened, the scrape of metal against stone. Outside the windows, Windsor remains wrapped in darkness, or perhaps in that grey English half-light that seems unable to decide whether morning is worth the effort. The ancient walls hold the night's cold surprisingly well. Stone possesses many admirable qualities, but generosity with warmth is not among them. You pull yourself from bed. Immediately, you miss central heating. There is no convenient thermostat waiting beside you. Warmth has to be created, carried, maintained, and eventually cleaned away if you are a servant responsible for preparing rooms. The comfort of someone more important depends partly on how quickly you can persuade yesterday's cold fireplace to become today's cheerful blaze. So the castle begins with fire. Grates must be cleared of ash. Coal has to be brought. Kindling is arranged. Fires are coaxed into life before the people occupying important rooms expect to feel their warmth. It is repetitive, dirty work. Coal dust finds fingers, clothing, floors, and probably places that Victorian respectability prefers not to discuss. By 1861, Britain's enormous dependence on coal touches almost every level of society. Industrial cities consume mountains of it. Railways burn it. Factories depend upon it. And wealthy households expect fires throughout large residences. Windsor Castle may represent monarchy and tradition, but its daily comfort is tied firmly to the fossil fuel powering Victorian Britain. You follow a servant carrying fuel through a route designed to keep such practical work away from ceremonial spaces. This hidden circulation is essential. A royal residence works best when labour appears almost invisible. Imagine waking in a warm room without seeing who cleaned the grate. Imagine finding fresh water without watching anyone carry it. Imagine breakfast arriving without hearing the kitchen preparations. That illusion requires people to rise before you. And if you happen to be one of those people, congratulations. You have discovered the Victorian version of being essential and unnoticed at exactly the same time. Water creates another problem. You cannot simply turn a modern tap and assume an endless stream of perfectly heated water will obediently appear. Water must be supplied through the castle's evolving Victorian plumbing arrangements, while hot water in particular still involves considerable preparation and labour. Basins, jugs, cans, and containers remain part of ordinary washing routines. A servant might carry warm water into a bedroom so its occupant can wash. The experience is more modest than modern bathing. Face, hands, perhaps neck and arms. A basin sits on a washstand, accompanied by soap, towels, brushes, and personal grooming objects. The water cools quickly. You discover this approximately 3 seconds after dipping your hands into it. Suddenly, Your morning shower at home seems like technological sorcery, and then there is the less glamorous side of nighttime life. Chamber pots. Yes, even castles have them. Royal architecture does not exempt the human body from inconvenient biological scheduling. Victorian sanitation is improving during this period, and Windsor has undergone modernisation over successive decades. But older domestic habits remain familiar. Portable chamber vessels and related arrangements are still part of 19th century household life, especially when convenient bathrooms and water closets are not attached to every sleeping room. Someone eventually has to remove what everyone else prefers to forget. This task belongs firmly to the invisible world of service. One of the stranger realities of Victorian domestic hierarchy is how closely servants can encounter the private lives of people who otherwise seem socially distant. A maid may handle bedding, clothing, washing water, personal objects, an intimate domestic mess while still being expected to behave as though she barely exists. Privacy works differently when another person maintains nearly everything around you. Historians have long disagreed over how successfully elite Victorian households maintained this supposed invisibility of servants. Diaries and household accounts suggest that employers could become remarkably accustomed to attendants moving through rooms, yet servants themselves remained constantly aware of the people they served. You begin to understand the imbalance. The important person may forget the servant is there. The servant cannot afford to forget the important person for a moment. As morning develops, bells begin punctuating the quiet. Large Victorian households commonly rely on systems of bells to summon servants from different parts of the building. A pull or mechanism connected to a bell elsewhere can announce that someone requires attention. To an inexperienced ear, it is simply ringing. To trained household staff, it is information. Which room, which person, which servant should respond. You imagine trying to learn the system during your first week. One bell rings. Everyone else continues calmly. You panic. Perhaps it is yours. Perhaps it is not. Perhaps Queen Victoria wants something. Perhaps somebody merely wants more hot water. Either way. Standing motionless and hoping the bell develops the ability to explain itself is probably not an excellent career strategy. Elsewhere, bedrooms are being restored from night into day, curtains are opened, blinds adjusted, fires attended, washing things removed, clothing prepared, beds eventually aired and made. Surfaces are cleaned carefully. The work has rhythm, and experienced hands move efficiently. You notice how physical almost everything is. Carrying coal is physical. Carrying water is physical. Cleaning fireplaces is physical. Moving linen is physical. Climbing stairs is certainly physical. Windsor's size magnifies every task. A forgotten object at the opposite end of a corridor is not merely inconvenient. It may mean another long walk through passages and stairways while attempting to look as though you absolutely intended to make the journey. Servants often use routes different from those favoured by the royal family and distinguished visitors. Back stairs and secondary passages help keep practical traffic away from formal circulation. You slip onto one of these staircases. It is narrower, less decorative. The difference tells you immediately whose comfort mattered when the space was planned. There is something almost theatrical about the arrangement. The staterooms are the stage. These passages are backstage, and backstage is already busy. Some servants begin preparing themselves as carefully as they prepare the rooms. Uniforms and appropriate dress matter. Hair must be tidy. Shoes need attention. Appearance communicates discipline. Hierarchy exists even among the servants. Senior household employees possess authority and status that junior workers do not. Duties can be divided according to gender, department, seniority, and proximity to the royal family. A servant working directly around royal persons occupies a different position from someone labouring deep within the domestic machinery. One curious tradition of great households is that servants can become intensely conscious of precedence among themselves. Who sits where, who answers to whom, and who receives particular privileges can matter enormously. even downstairs. Apparently, humanity finds a way to invent a seating plan. The castle grows brighter. Outside, the first real daylight settles across roofs and courtyards. You hear horses from the direction of the stables. Somewhere, preparations begin for movements later in the day. Deliveries and supplies must eventually enter this enormous organism. Messages will arrive, officials will appear, but upstairs, many rooms remain peaceful. That contrast feels almost absurd. Below and behind the visible household, people have already carried fuel, handled ash, moved water, cleaned surfaces, prepared fires, answered bells, and climbed enough stairs to make your legs file a formal complaint. All so someone else can wake gently. You pause beside a window where the glass feels cold near your face. A faint smell of coal smoke hangs outside. Chimneys are beginning to breathe above Windsor. One after another, fires come alive throughout the castle, each small flame marking another room prepared for human occupation. Soon the royal household will emerge fully into the morning, and once people leave their beds, another demanding Victorian ritual begins. They must become presentable, because here, clothing is never merely clothing. A coat can reveal position, a uniform can announce duty, a black dress can express mourning, a glove can signal refinement, and one careless button can quietly tell an entire corridor that you have failed before breakfast. You leave the warming rooms behind and follow the rustle of fabric toward wardrobes, dressing tables, brushes, polished shoes, folded linen, and the complicated business of dressing correctly for another day inside Windsor Castle. By the time the fires are burning properly, the castle has begun the delicate transformation from sleeping household to respectable Victorian society. And respectability requires clothing, a great deal of clothing. You stand beside a dressing table while pale morning light filters through the window, illuminating brushes, combs, folded linen, small containers, pins, gloves, and all the other objects required to convince the world that you woke looking civilized. You did not. Nobody does. Victorian society simply develops unusually elaborate methods for hiding the evidence. If you belong to the upper levels of the household, dressing can involve assistance from a personal servant. A gentleman of sufficiently elevated position may rely upon a valet, while an aristocratic woman may be assisted by a lady's maid. Royal dressing arrangements are more specialized still, shaped by rank, privacy, tradition, and the attendants assigned to particular members of the family. Clothing is not merely pulled on, it is assembled. For a gentleman, linen comes first, followed by trousers, waistcoat, shirt arrangements, neckwear, coat, stockings or socks, and carefully maintained shoes or boots. Depending upon his role, the day, and the occasion, he may wear formal court clothing, military uniform, riding clothes, or more ordinary daytime dress. Nothing should look accidental. Even the necktie demands attention. You attempt to arrange one. You fail. You attempt again. Somewhere, your hypothetical Victorian valet quietly begins reconsidering his career. For women, dressing can be considerably more complicated. By 1861, fashionable skirts are wide, and the cage crinoline has become one of the defining features of women's fashion. Introduced commercially in the later 1850s, the crinoline uses hoops, often made from steel, to support the skirt away from the legs. It replaces the need for numerous heavy petticoats and creates the enormous bell-shaped silhouette familiar from photographs and paintings of the period. There is a practical advantage. It can actually reduce the weight carried around the waist compared with layers of stiffened petticoats. There is also a practical disadvantage. You're now wearing architecture. You turn too quickly. Your skirt follows with the enthusiasm of a small tent caught in a breeze. Doorways require judgment, chairs require technique, crowded rooms require diplomacy, and open fires require caution. Crinolines became notorious for accidents when wide skirts came into contact with flames. Victorian newspapers reported frightening incidents involving dresses catching fire, particularly because fabrics could ignite quickly and the structure of the skirt allowed flames to spread. Royal surroundings do not magically eliminate that danger. Those cheerful fireplaces you appreciated earlier suddenly deserve considerably more respect. Beneath the visible dress come layers that help shape and protect the body. A chemise sits close to the skin. Drawers may be worn. Stockings rise up the legs. A corset shapes the torso, though the exact degree of tightness varies greatly between individuals. The popular image of every Victorian woman being brutally squeezed into an impossibly tiny waist is exaggerated. Some fashionable women certainly pursue dramatic silhouettes, but everyday corsetry also functions as ordinary structural underwear. Scholars continue to debate how widespread extreme tight lacing really was, compared with the enormous attention it received from critics, doctors, fashion writers, and satirists. As usual, Victorian society seems perfectly capable of arguing passionately about women's clothing. You suspect this habit will survive the century. Then comes the dress itself. Fabric announces wealth before anyone speaks. Silk behaves differently from wool. Fine materials, elaborate trimming, lace, ribbons, embroidery, and careful construction can signal money and status. Colour matters too. Though the Victorian world is not nearly as uniformly dark as modern imagination sometimes suggests, this is an age that loves colour. New synthetic dyes are beginning to transform fashion. The accidental discovery of mauve by William Henry Perkin in 1856 opened the door to brilliant chemical dyes, making shades available that attract enormous fashionable attention. So imagine the castle not simply in black, brown, and grey, but occasionally flashing with purple, blue, green, red, and richly decorated fabrics. Yet clothing here communicates more than wealth. It communicates situation. Morning dress differs from evening dress. Outdoor clothing differs from indoor clothing. Riding demands another arrangement. Court occasions have their own expectations. Military uniforms proclaim regiment and rank with astonishing efficiency. Servants wear clothing appropriate to their duties. And then there is mourning. Queen Victoria has already experienced family losses before 1861, but the culture of mourning is about to become overwhelmingly important to her life. Victorian mourning customs can influence clothing, jewellery, stationery, social behaviour, and the acceptable progression back toward ordinary colours. Black is not simply black. It can be a public language of grief. You look around the dressing room and realise how much Victorian clothing allows other people to read you, your occupation, your wealth, your gender, your social position, whether you're indoors or outdoors, whether you're attending dinner, whether someone close to you has died, perhaps even whether you understand the rules, and rules matter enormously inside Windsor. For male servants in visible positions, livery can turn the body into part of the household's public image. Footmen in formal dress are not simply workers. Their appearance contributes to the spectacle and dignity surrounding royalty. Buttons gleam, shoes are polished, clothing is brushed, hair is controlled. A stain is not merely unfortunate. It is rebellion by gravy. One quirky feature of 19th century royal and aristocratic clothing is the enormous amount of maintenance hidden behind elegance. Fine garments are brushed, aired, repaired, folded, pressed, stored, and protected. Gloves need replacing or cleaning. Boots require polishing. Delicate fabrics demand care. A wealthy person may own the clothes. Other people keep those clothes alive. You remember the servants rising in the darkness earlier? Their labour continues here. Someone has prepared these garments. Someone has cleaned the shoes. Someone has handled the linen. Someone will eventually deal with whatever dirt the day leaves behind. Even dressing becomes part of the same invisible machinery. At the dressing table, grooming continues. Hair is brushed and arranged. Men may cultivate whiskers, moustaches, or impressive sideburns according to taste and fashion. Prince Albert himself wears the facial hair familiar from his portraits. giving him the serious expression of a man who looks as though he has just been informed that somebody organised a drawer incorrectly. Women's hairstyles are generally controlled and carefully arranged, often parted in the centre and dressed around the sides or back. Jewellery adds another layer. A brooch may carry sentimental meaning. A miniature portrait may keep an absent relative symbolically close. Hair jewellery, sometimes made using the hair of loved ones, belongs to the broader 19th century culture of remembrance. To modern eyes, it can seem slightly eerie. To Victorians, it can be intimate and deeply affectionate. You fasten the final details. Perhaps gloves wait nearby. Gloves are particularly useful in a society obsessed with clean, controlled appearances. They protect hands, complete an outfit, and carry their own etiquette. Then you look at yourself. You are finally dressed. Not comfortable, necessarily, not free to move however you please, but respectable, and inside Windsor. Respectable is considerably safer. The castle outside your room has changed while you prepared. Footsteps are more frequent now. Voices remain controlled, but activity spreads through the corridors. The household is ready to be seen. And after all that dressing, brushing, tying, fastening, polishing, arranging, and quietly judging one another's sleeves, another requirement makes itself known. Hunger. Somewhere below. Kitchens have been awake for quite some time. Coffee, tea, bread, eggs, meat, butter, and countless other provisions are being transformed into breakfast. You follow the increasingly tempting smell through the castle, toward the complicated journey that carries food from heat, knives, pans, and hurried hands to polished tables where everything must appear perfectly effortless. This smell reaches you before the kitchens do. Warm bread, roasting meat, coffee, hot fat, smoke. Something sweet simmering somewhere beyond a doorway. After spending the morning being wrapped, buttoned, brushed, and generally imprisoned inside respectable Victorian clothing, your stomach finally discovers a subject on which it has strong opinions. Breakfast. But at Windsor Castle, breakfast does not simply appear. Before a polished dish reaches a royal table, it passes through an elaborate domestic system involving suppliers, kitchen workers, cooks, servants, storerooms, pantries, fires, utensils, china, silver, and enough organisation to make your morning bowl of cereal seem almost embarrassingly efficient. You move closer to the working heart of the castle. The atmosphere changes immediately. The quieter corridors give way to sharper sounds. Knives strike boards. Metal touches metal. Pans shift across hot surfaces. A door opens and releases a breath of warm air carrying the smell of cooked food. Someone walks past carrying a tray. Nobody seems interested in explaining anything to you. Everyone has work. Great royal kitchens have supported Windsor for centuries, although their equipment and organisation change repeatedly as the castle itself evolves. By Victoria's reign, preparing food for the royal household remains a substantial operation, especially when guests, officials, attendants, and servants must all be fed, and they do not necessarily eat the same things. Hierarchy follows you into the kitchen. Different ranks within a large household can receive different meals, dine in different places, and eat according to different schedules. The royal family occupies one level of this edible pyramid. Senior household figures inhabit others. Below them are various categories of servants whose meals form part of the practical cost of maintaining the establishment. Even potatoes, apparently, understand class. You pass preparation tables where ingredients are being cleaned, cut, measured, and arranged. Victorian Britain has access to an extraordinary range of foods. Railways have accelerated the movement of fresh produce and other provisions. London's markets connect consumers with meat, fish, vegetables, fruit, dairy products, spices, tea, coffee, sugar, and imported luxuries from across Britain and the wider world. Windsor's proximity to London and its railway connections make it far less isolated than its medieval walls suggest. The railway age has changed the royal breakfast table. Food can travel faster, messages can travel faster, people can travel faster. Only Victorian table manners remain determined to take their time. Tea is already deeply embedded in British domestic life, and the leaves in your cup represent a global network stretching far beyond Windsor. During the 19th century, Britain's tea trade increasingly turns toward production in India, as well as continued supplies from China. Coffee is available too. Then there is bread, one of the foundations of everyday eating across social classes. For wealthier diners, breakfast might include eggs, fish, cold meats, bacon or other substantial dishes depending upon preference and circumstance. Victorian upper-class breakfast could be surprisingly hearty by modern standards. You imagine confronting several dishes shortly after waking. Your stomach, previously enthusiastic, becomes slightly more diplomatic. Cooking all of this requires heat, and heat means work. Coal ranges and kitchen fires demand attention. Temperatures cannot be selected by pressing a glowing button. Experienced cooks judge heat through practice, observation, timing, and familiarity with their equipment. This is knowledge carried in hands and habits. A cook understands the fire, an assistant understands the preparation. Another worker knows where particular utensils belong. The kitchen functions through repetition so practiced that much of it becomes almost instinctive. There is still uncertainty over exactly how every ordinary working routine unfolded at Windsor on any particular morning, because official records naturally preserve some aspects of royal life far better than the tiny gestures of domestic labour. Household accounts can tell you what was purchased or paid, while diaries and memoirs offer glimpses of routine. But they rarely capture every hurried instruction beside a hot stove, so you listen instead. A knife chopping herbs, the hiss of moisture meeting heat, a brief instruction, footsteps, the crackle of fuel. Someone laughs quietly, then immediately returns to work. It feels human. That is easy to forget when thinking about royal residences. History tends to preserve the banquet rather than the person scrubbing the pan afterward. Yet the pan matters. So does washing. Every plate sent upstairs eventually returns. Every cup needs cleaning. Every knife, spoon, serving dish, pot, and pan enters a cycle of use and restoration, and royal dining involves impressive quantities of tableware. Silver requires particular care because tarnish is unacceptable in formal surroundings. Polishing becomes another hidden occupation, repeated endlessly so that guests can admire shining objects without contemplating the exhausted hands responsible for the shine. One lesser-known curiosity of elite Victorian dining is the continuing importance of elaborate table presentation. Food is not merely nourishment, it can become display. With carefully arranged dishes, decorative serving pieces, folded napkins, flowers, and formal placement contributing to the experience. The table itself performs, and servants become its stagehands. Before breakfast reaches that stage, however, it must travel. This journey fascinates you. A dish prepared perfectly in the kitchen can cool while being carried through a huge building. Windsor's scale makes distance a practical enemy. Routes therefore matter. Servants must move efficiently through passages and stairways, carrying trays while avoiding unnecessary interference with formal areas. You follow at a safe distance behind a servant carrying breakfast dishes. The smell is cruel. Warm toast passes within reach. You consider stealing one piece. Then you remember that you are inside the principal residence of Queen Victoria. You decide that becoming historically memorable as the Windsor toast thief is probably not worth it. The servant continues, through a passage, around a corner, upward. The working environment gradually becomes quieter as you approach spaces where food will actually be consumed. That transition is almost magical. Behind you lies heat, noise, smoke, knives, heavy pots, shouted instructions, and constant movement. Ahead lies calm, carpet, china, silver, napkins, perhaps flowers. The labour disappears. That disappearance is the entire point. Royal service values smoothness. A meal should arrive correctly prepared and properly presented. The diner should not need to think about coal deliveries, kitchen temperatures, dirty pans, or the unfortunate person who has carried a heavy tray through several corridors. The illusion of effortless abundance is itself a form of luxury. Breakfast also creates opportunities for family routine. Queen Victoria and Prince Albert cultivate a domestic image unusual in its intensity for the monarchy. Their marriage and children become central to the public representation of the royal family. Yet private meals do not automatically mean casual meals in the modern sense. Schedules still matter, attendance matters, servants remain nearby, letters and business may wait. The day is already gathering around the table. You hear the soft clink of china. Tea is poured, butter meets bread. A knife touches a plate. Conversation stays low, outside. Windsor is fully awake now. Carriages move through the surrounding town. Smoke rises into the morning air. Inside the castle, servants continue transporting food to different parts of the household, and while the royal family eats, another group has already eaten, or waits for its own appointed meal. Servants need feeding too. Their dining arrangements reflect the same hierarchy that shapes their work. Senior servants can occupy a distinct social world from junior employees. The servants' hall is not a democratic refuge from upstairs rank. Status simply changes clothing and comes downstairs. You might spend the morning obeying a superior and then discover that dinner also reminds you who that superior is. Victorian efficiency with a side serving of social anxiety. Still, meals provide moments of rest, a chair, warm food, conversation, perhaps a few minutes when aching feet are allowed to stop. Then the bells begin again, because breakfast ends, plates must vanish, rooms must be restored, the royal day moves onward, and the people who make that movement possible return to their positions. You watch one servant collect dishes while another receives an instruction nearby. Their work is precise, practiced, and largely unnoticed. Soon you will follow them beyond the breakfast table and deeper into their world. There you will meet the footmen who seem permanently polished, the maids who know rooms more intimately than many guests ever will, the housekeepers who control complicated domestic territories, and the attendants whose lives unfold remarkably close to royalty. For if Windsor Castle is a machine, these are the people who keep its gears turning quietly behind the walls. The breakfast dishes disappear almost as quietly as they arrived. One moment the table carries cups, plates, crumbs, folded linen, and the remiss of a substantial Victorian morning meal. The next, practiced hands begin removing everything, and the room slowly returns to its polished calm. You follow those hands. This time, instead of watching the food, you watch the people carrying it. They are everywhere once you learn to notice them. Footmen move through visible parts of the household with controlled precision. Maids pass through bedrooms and private rooms performing less glamorous tasks. Pages carry messages and respond to instructions. Senior servants supervise departments. Personal attendants remain close to particular members of the royal family. Then there are equerries, gentlemen connected with the royal household, secretaries, dressers, stable employees, and an assortment of specialised roles that make Windsor feel less like a private home and more like a carefully administered institution. The British royal household in Victoria's reign is indeed an institution, with established offices and traditions extending far beyond ordinary domestic service. You could work inside the castle for years and still occupy only one small corner of its machinery. Consider the footman passing you now. His appearance matters because he works where important people can see him. His clothes must be immaculate, his posture controlled, his movements economical. He may answer doors, attend at meals, carry messages or objects, accompany carriages, and perform other duties depending upon his exact position. He is expected to notice what is needed without becoming the centre of attention. That is a peculiar skill. You must be present enough to help and absent enough not to disturb. Try doing that while carrying a tray. You immediately appreciate the difficulty. A footman who crashes into furniture will certainly become visible, but perhaps not in the career-enhancing sense. The royal household also contains pages, including positions associated directly with the sovereign. Some roles carry traditions and ceremonial importance far beyond the apparently simple tasks their titles suggest. Titles can be deceptive here. A person described as a servant may occupy a trusted position close to the monarch, while another worker may spend years labouring within the same castle and almost never enter the Queen's private presence. Proximity becomes a kind of currency. The closer your duties bring you to royalty, the more carefully behaviour is regulated. Queen Victoria does not move through her residence entirely alone. Ladies of the royal household attend her. Dressers and personal servants help maintain the practical routine surrounding clothing and private domestic life. Equerries and officials assist with engagements, correspondence, visitors, travel, and ceremonial responsibilities. Prince Albert has his own attendants and staff arrangements. The children have governesses, tutors, nurses, servants, and other adults orbiting their lives. Every important person creates another circle of employment. You begin to imagine Windsor from above, not as rooms, but as invisible networks. The Queen stands at the centre of one, Albert at the centre of another. Their children create smaller networks. Departments overlap. Instructions travel outward. Information travels inward. And somewhere in the middle, a servant desperately hopes nobody has misplaced a glove. Housekeepers occupy especially important positions in large establishments. A senior housekeeper is not simply someone who occasionally checks whether the shelves look dusty. She can oversee female domestic staff, linen, cleaning standards, stores, rooms, and considerable quantities of valuable household property. Keys become symbols of authority. Cupboards, storerooms, linen closets, and supplies require supervision. In great households, responsibility for valuable materials can be enormous. One easily overlooked detail is the sheer value represented by ordinary castle contents. Linen, china, silver, furniture, fabrics, carpets, and decorative objects must be counted, maintained, repaired, stored, and protected. Someone has to know where things are, preferably before the Queen asks. A missing teaspoon sounds trivial until it belongs to a royal service, and your superior wants to know why it has developed independent political ambitions. The division of labour also follows Victorian assumptions about gender. Women dominate many areas of indoor domestic service, particularly cleaning, laundry, bedchamber work, and personal attendance upon women. Men are more visible in roles such as footmen, porters, coachmen, grooms, and certain formal household positions. Yet actual duties can be more complicated than a simple list suggests. Surviving records reveal official appointments and wages more readily than they reveal every informal favour, whispered instruction, swapped duty, or moment when someone quietly helps another exhausted worker finish a task. That leaves room for disagreement about how rigidly everyday boundaries operated when the household was under pressure. Formal rules may look wonderfully tidy on paper, while human beings have a habit of becoming less tidy the moment somebody calls in sick. You pass a maid carrying linen. Her day has probably begun early. Beds need attention. Rooms require cleaning. Water must be moved. Clothing and personal belongings need handling. Dust is a constant enemy. So is soot. Coal fires warm the castle, but they also create ash and grime. Candles and lamps leave their own traces. Mud arrives on footwear. Huge buildings generate endless surfaces that appear to possess a personal desire to become dirty. The maid cleans something today. Tomorrow, it requires cleaning again. There is a strangely timeless cruelty in that. Royal dust is still dust. Laundry presents another exhausting world. Victorian clothing involves many layers, and a large household produces mountains of linen. Washing is physically demanding, involving hot water, soap, rubbing, rinsing, drying, pressing, folding, sorting, and returning items to the correct places. Fine fabrics require different treatment from sturdy household linen. Mistakes can be expensive. You do not want to discover what happens when a delicate royal garment enters the wrong washing process. You suspect there is no cheerful little sign saying, "These things happen." Another intriguing feature of palace service is the possibility of long relationships between royals and trusted attendants. Queen Victoria is capable of forming strong attachments to servants and household figures. Although affection does not erase the enormous social distance between sovereign and employee, that mixture can feel strange. A servant may witness illness, grief, arguments, celebrations, pregnancies, childhood moments, and private habits that the wider public never sees. Yet discretion is expected. Royal service brings access without ownership of the information that access provides. You hear a conversation stop as someone approaches. Perhaps it concerns nothing important. Perhaps that habit of caution is simply ingrained. In a household where privacy matters, knowing when not to speak can be as valuable as knowing what to do. Loyalty is therefore practical as well as emotional. A trusted servant protects routines. A good attendant anticipates preferences. An experienced member of staff learns moods, who dislikes being disturbed, who wants a particular room arranged a certain way, who expects punctuality, who will notice a detail that somebody else ignores. This knowledge rarely appears in official job descriptions, but it is what makes a household function smoothly. You think back to the fires before dawn, the warm water, the polished shoes, the breakfast arriving without visible chaos. None of it happens automatically. Windsor's grandeur rests upon accumulated acts of labour, many performed by people whose names rarely appear in popular histories of Queen Victoria, and yet their footsteps fill the castle. They are in the corridors before the family wakes. They remain after meals. They carry letters, clothing, water, coal, trays, towels, luggage, instructions, and secrets. They keep the royal day moving. But there is one person whose influence in Windsor during 1861 extends far beyond ordinary household routine. You begin noticing signs of him everywhere. A schedule influenced by his preferences, a discussion shaped by his interests, a room connected with his work. Prince Albert is not simply the Queen's husband living quietly beside the throne. He has become deeply involved in family life, culture, administration, science, education, and the image of monarchy itself. And as you follow the household deeper into the day, you move gradually toward the man whose presence seems firmly woven into Windsor, a presence that, although nobody around you wishes to imagine it yet, has only months remaining. You sense Prince Albert's presence before you actually encounter him. It is there in the ordered rhythm of the household, in conversations about correspondence and appointments, in the education of the children, and in the curious mixture of domestic discipline and intellectual ambition that has developed around Queen Victoria's family. By 1861, Albert is 42 years old. He has been married to Victoria for more than 21 years, and during that time the young German prince who once arrived in Britain as an uncertain foreign husband has become one of the most influential people surrounding the British throne. His official title is Prince Consort, granted to him by Victoria in 1857. His actual influence is harder to fit neatly onto a calling card. You imagine following him through Windsor during an ordinary working day. Do not expect endless lounging. Albert possesses a powerful appetite for organisation. Papers matter, schedules matter, education matters, improvement matters, and if something can be classified, redesigned, investigated, reorganised, or placed into a sensible administrative system, Albert is probably interested. He is closely involved with Victoria's work and regularly assists with political correspondence and official papers. The Queen remains the sovereign, but marriage has created a working partnership in which Albert becomes an important advisor. That partnership has developed gradually. Earlier in their marriage, Albert struggled to find a meaningful public role. Britain does not provide a convenient constitutional handbook explaining precisely what an intelligent, ambitious male consort should do when his wife possesses the crown. So he builds a role. You enter a room where papers seem to multiply whenever nobody's looking. Letters, reports, memoranda, documents awaiting attention. The romantic image of palace life begins to collapse under stationery. Albert reads extensively and writes constantly. His interests range across politics, science, technology, education, art, agriculture, architecture, and social reform. He supports institutions intended to encourage learning and practical improvement. The Great Exhibition of 1851 remains his most famous public achievement. 10 years before the morning you are imagining, millions of visitors had entered the Crystal Palace in London's Hyde Park to see machinery, manufactured goods, raw materials, artworks, and products gathered from Britain and around the world. Albert became strongly associated with that enormous celebration of industry and international exchange. Profits from the exhibition helped support the development of cultural and educational institutions in South Kensington. So when you hear someone casually describe Albert as merely Queen Victoria's husband, you begin to understand how incomplete that description is. He works, perhaps too much. That possibility becomes increasingly important in 1861. People around Albert have reasons to worry about his health during his later years. He can appear tired and overburdened, and the accumulated pressure of public duties, family responsibilities, and constant work seems to weigh heavily upon him. Victorian medicine, unfortunately, is not ideally equipped to tell you exactly what is happening inside a body. You may look exhausted. A doctor can observe symptoms. He can listen. He can examine. But modern laboratory tests, advanced imaging, antibiotics, and much of today's diagnostic medicine lie far in the future. For now, Albert continues with his responsibilities, and those responsibilities include a family large enough to require its own administrative strategy. Victoria and Albert have 9 children. By 1861, their eldest daughter, Victoria, known within the family as Vicky, is married to Prince Frederick of Prussia and living abroad. Their eldest son, Albert Edward, known as Bertie and destined to become Edward VII, is 20 years old. Other children remain closer to the immediate family household. Albert takes their education seriously, very seriously, perhaps alarmingly seriously if you happen to be one of the children. Lessons are not merely preparation for examinations. The royal children are expected to develop character, discipline, knowledge, and a strong sense of duty. Albert participates in planning their education and worries about their futures. The question of Bertie's development causes particular concern. Father and eldest son differ in temperament. Albert is disciplined, intellectual, earnest, and intensely purposeful. Bertie is sociable and less naturally suited to the rigorous educational program designed for him. The surviving family correspondence leaves historians room to interpret just how much of their tension came from personality, unrealistic parental expectations, or the extraordinary burden placed upon an heir to the throne. You can almost feel that tension in the castle. Every family contains expectations. Royal families simply preserve theirs in archives. Albert's German background also continues to shape his private world. He was born in the Duchy of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha in 1819. German language, culture, music, family traditions, and personal connections remain important to him. Christmas customs are one famous example of the Victorian royal family's cultural influence. Decorated Christmas trees already existed in Britain before Albert arrived, so he did not personally introduce the Christmas tree to the country, despite the popular story, but images of Victoria, Albert, and their children gathered around decorated trees helped make the custom highly fashionable among British middle-class families. It is a perfect little example of how royal domestic life can influence ordinary homes. You decorate a tree because the royal family looks charming beside one. 2 centuries later, someone confidently claims Albert invented Christmas. History has excellent marketing. There are gentler aspects to his life at Windsor too. Albert enjoys music and is an accomplished musician. He plays the organ and composes. Imagine the sound drifting through a royal residence, not speeches, not military commands. Music, for a moment. The castle becomes less institutional. Albert and Victoria share a genuine enthusiasm for music, art and performance. Their marriage is emotionally intense as well as politically significant. Victoria's journals and letters make her affection unmistakable. She admires him deeply. She relies upon him. That reliance will make the approaching loss particularly devastating. But you are not there yet. It is still 1861 and Albert is alive. You see him moving through rooms, attending to work, thinking about his children, reading papers, discussing matters with Victoria, and participating in the routines of a marriage that has lasted more than 2 decades. One lesser-known feature of Albert's personality is his fascination with practical improvement on the royal estates, at places such as Windsor and Osborne. He takes interest in agricultural management, building projects, drainage, and technological efficiency. The prince who appears stiff in formal portraits can be surprisingly hands-on when confronted with machinery or estate planning. Give him a drainage problem and he may become positively enthusiastic. There is something almost modern about the impulse. Measure it, study it, improve it. Unfortunately, human beings resist efficient management, especially children, especially adult children. And in late 1861, anxiety surrounding Bertie becomes painfully important. Reports reach Albert concerning his eldest son's behaviour while undergoing military training in Ireland. The details involve an actress named Nellie Clifton and a brief sexual relationship that horrifies the deeply moral parents. Albert is distressed in November, despite poor health. He travels to Cambridge to speak privately with Bertie. Later family memory gives this meeting enormous emotional weight, because Albert dies only weeks afterward. Victoria will come to associate Bertie's behaviour with the stress suffered by her husband. Modern historians are far more cautious about drawing such a direct medical connection. Albert's final illness is traditionally identified as typhoid fever, although later researchers have questioned that diagnosis and proposed other possibilities based on the pattern and duration of his symptoms. The evidence cannot give you the certainty modern medicine might demand. For the moment, however, death still feels distant. The castle continues around him. Documents wait. Children require attention. Meals arrive. Visitors come and go. Albert works. You watch him disappear through another doorway and hear the ordinary sounds of Windsor close behind him. Nobody rings a bell announcing that these are the final months. History rarely provides that kindness instead. Life continues in ordinary detail. And some of the busiest lives unfolding around Albert belong to the children whose education, behaviour, marriages, and futures occupy so much of his attention. Their Windsor is different again. Smaller chairs, lesson books, governesses, games, dogs, corrections, expectations. And the peculiar problem of trying to grow up normally when your mother is Queen Victoria, and half of Europe seems interested in whom you might eventually marry. You follow the sound of younger voices, leaving Albert's papers behind as the castle opens into the carefully supervised world of royal childhood. The younger voices draw you away from Albert's papers and into a part of Windsor where royal dignity encounters one of its oldest enemies, children. Behind these doors, the monarchy becomes smaller. There are lesson books, maps, pencils, musical exercises, toys, half-finished activities, and adults whose expressions suggest that persuading princes and princesses to concentrate is not substantially easier than persuading anyone else's children. You hear footsteps approaching. A child appears, followed closely enough by an attendant to remind you that royal childhood is rarely private. By 1861, Victoria and Albert's 9 children range from adulthood to early childhood. Their youngest, Princess Beatrice, is only 4 years old. Prince Leopold is 8. Princess Louise is 13, while Princess Helena is 15. The eldest children are already moving toward adult responsibilities. This means Windsor contains several versions of childhood at once. A nursery world exists alongside adolescence, court expectations, university preparation, military training, and marriage negotiations. You follow the younger children first. Their rooms are more comfortable than those of ordinary Victorian children. Obviously, they have servants, excellent clothing, abundant food, access to gardens and estates, and educational opportunities beyond the dreams of most families. Yet privilege comes with supervision. Someone always seems to know where you are. A nurse, a governess, a tutor, a parent, an attendant, possibly all five. You begin to appreciate the rebellious potential of hiding behind a curtain. Victoria and Albert want their children to experience something resembling disciplined family life rather than growing entirely detached inside court ceremony. They cultivate an image of domestic monarchy centered upon parents and children. The image becomes famous. Paintings and photographs present the family together. The development of photography is especially important during Victoria's reign. The royal couple enthusiastically embraces the new medium and understands its extraordinary ability to create intimate-looking images that can circulate beyond the palace for ordinary people. Seeing royalty in photographs makes the family seem strangely immediate. The Queen has children. The children grow. The family poses together. Royalty becomes visually familiar in a new way. Inside Windsor, however, the experience is less perfectly composed. Children need lessons. Albert takes education seriously, and the educational program developed for the royal children can be demanding. Languages matter. History matters. Geography matters. Religion matters. Music, drawing, and other accomplishments have their place. The sons and daughters are not educated identically because Victorian expectations for men and women remain sharply different. But neither parent wants the children simply drifting through luxurious idleness. You sit near a table where books have been arranged. Imagine studying geography while knowing that parts of the map represent territories governed in your mother's name. That must make the lesson slightly unusual. Here is India. Your mother is Queen. Here is Canada. Still your mother. Please stop drawing in the margin. Royal education may be privileged, but apparently even monarchy cannot defeat doodling. The children also learn languages useful to their international family connections. German is particularly natural within Victoria and Albert's household because of Albert's origins and the family's extensive German relations. French is important too. Royal marriages connect courts across Europe, and language is both cultural accomplishment and practical preparation, for the daughters especially. Marriage may eventually mean leaving Britain. Their elder sister Vicky has already demonstrated this. She married Prince Frederick of Prussia in 1858 and moved to Germany. Family correspondence becomes essential in maintaining emotional connections across borders. Letters carry affection, advice, complaints, news, and parental concern. The royal children grow up knowing that adulthood may scatter them across Europe. That gives childhood at Windsor a slightly temporary quality. The nursery is secure, the future is diplomatic. Albert's educational ideals do not always produce the results he hopes for. Bertie remains the clearest example. His parents worry about his concentration, judgment, and readiness for kingship. The educational pressure placed upon him is intense, and modern biographers have interpreted the consequences in different ways. Some emphasize genuine weaknesses in the young prince's application, while others wonder whether the program designed for him was simply too rigid for his temperament. The documents preserve parental frustration beautifully. What they cannot preserve quite so easily is how it feels to be the child receiving it. You can imagine. Every poor mark becomes a constitutional concern. Every youthful mistake carries the possibility of embarrassing the monarchy. Your parents do not merely ask what you intend to do with your life. Everyone already knows. You're going to be king. No pressure. For the younger children, Windsor still offers play. The royal family keeps many animals, and Victoria is famously fond of dogs. The children grow up around pets, horses, and the broader animal life associated with royal estates. Dogs soften the atmosphere immediately A royal dog does not care about precedence. It does not care whether your father is Prince Consort. It does not care whether your German grammar is disappointing. It cares whether you possess food. Finally, a sensible creature. There are outdoor opportunities too. The vast surroundings of Windsor provide space for walking, riding, carriage outings, and supervised recreation. The children can experience gardens and countryside unavailable to children growing up amid Britain's increasingly crowded industrial towns. But even recreation can contain educational purpose. Albert is interested in physical development as well as intellectual discipline. Exercise, fresh air, practical skills, and structured activities fit his broader belief that children should be prepared deliberately for adult responsibility. An unexpectedly charming part of the royal children's upbringing involves miniature domestic worlds created for them elsewhere on the royal estates. At Osborne House on the Isle of Wight, for example, the children have Swiss Cottage, where they practice activities such as cooking and gardening. The idea is delightfully strange. Imagine being a princess learning household skills in a specially built miniature Swiss-style house, while actual servants maintain the enormous royal residence nearby. It is practical education performed with spectacular resources at Windsor. Similar parental ideals follow the children through their routines. Victoria can be affectionate, playful, impatient, possessive, demanding, and deeply emotional as a mother. She does not conform neatly to the later image of the permanently stern widow in black before Albert's death. Family life contains warmth and humour as well as discipline. The children see their parents together, they hear music, they participate in birthdays and Christmas celebrations, they receive presents, they quarrel, they become ill, they disappoint their parents, they make them proud. In other words, beneath the royal titles, family life retains its stubbornly ordinary qualities. There are peculiar differences, of course. Your mother's official engagements can alter household schedules. Your father's political concerns may interrupt domestic time. Your siblings might marry into foreign royal houses. Your family disagreements may later be studied by people you will never meet. Even the nursery eventually becomes historical evidence. Still, at this moment, you hear laughter. It travels along the corridor and disappears behind a closing door. Another child passes with an adult. A lesson begins somewhere nearby. A piano repeats the same passage several times, once, again, again. The final attempt is better. You find yourself wondering how much freedom these children truly feel. The answer is difficult to recover from schedules and correspondence alone. Childhood memories written later can be coloured by grief, affection, resentment, and everything that happens afterward. The surviving evidence gives you fragments rather than access to their private thoughts. Perhaps Windsor feels safe, perhaps restrictive, probably both. You look through a window toward the immense castle beyond. For a child, these walls might seem permanent. Parents often seem permanent too. That illusion is especially strong when your father is only 42. No child here expects the family structure to collapse before Christmas, so lessons continue, books close. A governess gives an instruction. Someone runs a little too quickly and is reminded to slow down. Life moves onward toward adulthood without realizing that grief is moving toward it from the opposite direction. You leave the schoolroom gently. Beyond it lie the spaces the children must eventually learn to inhabit as royal adults. Rooms designed not for play but for display. Grand chambers where paintings watch from walls, ceilings rise overhead, polished furniture waits in exact positions, and every doorway seems to lead deeper into ceremony. The private family world begins to fade behind you, ahead. Windsor opens into its magnificent public face. The children's voices fade until all you can hear is the measured sound of your own footsteps. The corridor seems to widen, the ceiling rises, light falls differently here, touching polished surfaces and catching the edges of gilded frames. The atmosphere tells you, before anyone needs to explain it, that you have crossed from the intimate geography of family life into the ceremonial heart of Windsor. These are rooms designed to impress, and they succeed. You enter the staid apartment slowly. Paintings climb across the walls, rich carpets soften your steps. Furniture stands with the slightly intimidating perfection of furniture nobody has ever dared to move without permission. Decorative objects occupy tables and cabinets. Chandeliers hang overhead, waiting for evening. There is gold, there is carving, there is velvet. There is enough visual confidence to remind you that modesty was never the primary architectural objective of monarchy. Yet what you see in 1861 is not simply medieval Windsor preserved unchanged. The castle has been repeatedly rebuilt. One of the most important transformations occurred during the reign of George IV, Victoria's uncle, who employed the architect Geoffrey Wyatville during the 1820s and 1830s to reshape large parts of Windsor. Wyatville strengthened the castle's Gothic appearance, altered towers and buildings, and created much of the dramatic silhouette that later generations associate with Windsor. So you're walking through something curious, an ancient castle that has been deliberately made to look even more magnificently ancient. Very British. Why merely inherit history when you can renovate it? You continue into another chamber. The state apartments serve ceremonial and official purposes, and their decoration communicates dynastic continuity. Military power, taste, wealth, and royal authority. Portraits are especially effective. Kings stare at you, queens stare at you, generals stare at you, dead aristocrats stare at you. You begin to feel that Windsor has developed surveillance technology using oil paint. The royal collection includes works accumulated by generations of monarchs. Victoria inherits not merely buildings but objects, paintings, furniture, books, weapons, decorative arts, and countless physical traces of previous reigns. Living here means living among ancestors. Imagine passing portraits of earlier sovereigns while carrying out your own duties as monarch. The message is difficult to ignore. You are temporary. The institution continues. Victoria understands that continuity well. In 1861, she has reigned since 1837, long enough for an entire generation to associate monarchy with her face. But Windsor constantly reminds her that others occupied these rooms before her. Some rooms carry particular ceremonial identities. St. George's Hall, for example, forms one of the great spaces associated with royal entertaining and ceremony in Victoria's time. Its appearance differs from what later visitors will know, because Windsor undergoes further alterations across subsequent generations, especially after the devastating fire of 1992. You must resist imagining the modern castle exactly as it appears today. The Windsor surrounding you belongs specifically to the 19th century. Gaslighting has begun altering how important interiors can be illuminated. Although candles and other forms of lighting remain part of the broader household world, at night, artificial light catches gilding, glass, polished wood, silver, and bright fabric. The effect must be extraordinary. It also produces heat, fumes, maintenance, and risk. Grandeur always sends someone a bill. You approach one of the fireplaces. It is substantial, because heating these enormous rooms is no small challenge. The fire may look comforting from directly in front of it. Take several steps away, and the ancient stone begins quietly reclaiming your body temperature. Heavy curtains and carpets help soften both cold and sound. Upholstery adds comfort. Fires provide localized warmth. Still, a grand room can remain less cozy than its appearance suggests. There is an unresolved question among architectural historians and social historians about how occupants actually perceived comfort in spaces like these. Modern expectations of evenly heated interiors distort our judgment. A Victorian accustomed to cooler rooms may have experienced the same temperature very differently from you. Your modern toes remain unconvinced. You keep walking. Some rooms are associated with receiving visitors. Others support ceremonies, dinners, gatherings, or court functions. How you move through them depends upon who you are. A royal person may pass freely where a servant enters only for work. A distinguished visitor might be conducted through a carefully chosen sequence of spaces. A tradesman delivering practical supplies sees another Windsor entirely. Architecture organises access. The grander the room, the more controlled entry becomes. Even doors participate in hierarchy. You notice chairs positioned around a chamber. Seating seems harmless until etiquette becomes involved. Who sits, who remains standing, who sits closest to royalty, who enters first, who waits. Furniture can become political surprisingly quickly. One delightful oddity of court interiors is how objects that appear purely decorative can carry ceremonial histories of their own. Certain pieces of furniture, paintings, weapons, and trophies become associated with particular monarchs or events, turning rooms into collections of remembered stories. A visitor who understands those references reads the room almost like a book. You, unfortunately, are still trying not to trip over the carpet. The paintings offer another distraction. Royal collecting has brought works by major European artists into Windsor. Van Dyck, Rubens, Rembrandt, Canaletto, and other celebrated names are represented within the wider royal collection for Victoria and Albert. Art is not merely inherited decoration. Both take serious interest in visual culture. Albert in particular supports artistic education and design, believing that art and industry can improve one another. Photography has also entered the royal world. This new medium sits strangely beside centuries of painted portraiture. A painted royal portrait might require long sittings and deliberate symbolic composition. A photograph creates a different intimacy. It catches faces with startling immediacy. By 1861, the royal family is among the most photographed families in Europe. You wonder whether the painted monarchs on the walls approve. Probably not. They look difficult to impress. You move onward beneath high ceilings. For servants, these magnificent spaces mean work. Carpets need cleaning, furniture needs dusting, fireplaces require tending, windows need attention. Metalwork must be polished before an important occasion. Rooms must be prepared according to exact expectations. Afterward, they must be restored. Imagine cleaning beneath a priceless painting while trying not to think about how many years of wages it might represent. The safest strategy is probably not to sneeze. Large gatherings create even more complexity. Furniture may need rearranging. Lighting must be prepared. Fires must be managed. Refreshments or meals require coordination. Servants need to occupy the correct positions, and timing matters. Royal ceremony depends upon everyone behaving as though the entire thing happens naturally. It does not. Behind every smooth entrance lies planning. Behind every formal dinner lies a kitchen. Behind every shining room lies someone with a cloth. You pause before another window beyond the glass. Towers and courtyards frame pieces of sky. The view is magnificent. Then you look back. From here, Windsor seems almost unreal. A succession of grand chambers created to express permanence. But you now know better. You remember the coal carried before dawn, the water jugs, the chamber pots, the breakfast pans, the laundry, the servants climbing narrow stairs while royal life proceeds through broad corridors. The state apartments are the visible surface. Below and behind them exists another castle. It smells less like polished wood and more like soap, damp fabric, coal, dust, hot water, and human effort. So you turn away from the portraits. Your footsteps leave the grand carpet. A smaller doorway appears. The decoration becomes simpler. The light changes again. And slowly you descend from Windsor's magnificent stage into the cramped backstage world beneath the grand staircases, where the castle keeps everything it prefers its visitors never notice. The carpet disappears beneath your feet. Stone returns, so does the smell of coal. Within only a few turns, the magnificent Windsor of portraits and gilded furniture feels surprisingly distant. The ceilings lower, decoration becomes sparse, and the passages seem interested in usefulness rather than beauty. You have reached the other castle, not a separate building, of course, but the network of service spaces that allows the grand rooms above to maintain their illusion of effortless perfection. Here, nobody needs to impress an ambassador. Things simply need to work. You pass a doorway and find shelves holding supplies. Farther along, linen waits to be sorted. Baskets stand against walls. Cleaning equipment occupies corners. Someone carries a container past you with the brisk expression of a person who has no intention of explaining its contents. The architecture itself changes your behaviour. In the state apartments, you instinctively slow down. Here, everyone moves with purpose. These corridors connect work to work. They allow servants to move between rooms while minimising unnecessary appearances in formal areas. Back staircases provide another layer of circulation. Narrow and practical compared with the grand stairs used by royal occupants and important visitors, the contrast is almost comical. Upstairs, a staircase announces, "Behold the monarchy." Downstairs, another staircase says, "Please carry this bucket quickly." You begin descending. The steps are harder beneath your shoes. There may be little natural light, particularly in internal passages. Lamps and candles become necessary in darker corners. Even during parts of the day, the air can feel cooler too. Windsor's medieval origins make its internal geography complicated. Later generations altered and modernised the castle, but no renovation can completely erase the fact that this is an enormous historic structure developed over centuries, rather than a single building designed from one neat plane. Service routes therefore adapt to architecture inherited from the past. That means distance. Lots of distance. You remember the servant carrying breakfast earlier. Now you understand the journey better. Imagine walking these passages repeatedly while carrying trays, water, coal, linen, luggage, cleaning equipment, or supplies. Your legs begin aching in sympathy, and you have barely started. Coal occupies a particularly important place in this hidden geography. Every fireplace consuming fuel creates a chain of labour. Coal has to arrive at the castle. It must be stored. Smaller quantities must be moved toward individual rooms. Ash must later be removed. The grate needs cleaning. Then the cycle begins again. Britain in 1861 is approaching the height of its coal-powered industrial dominance, and even Windsor's domestic rhythms depend upon the same black fuel-driving factories and locomotives across the country. Royal warmth begins underground in somebody else's dangerous working day. That connection remains invisible when you're standing beside a pleasant fire. Down here, it feels harder to ignore. Soot settles, dust gathers, ash escapes. The castle requires constant cleaning, partly because the technologies keeping it warm and illuminated create their own dirt. You follow the faint smell of soap toward another working area. Laundry is moving through its endless cycle. A royal household generates staggering quantities of washable material: sheets, pillowcases, towels, table linen, servants' linen, personal garments, cleaning cloths, and dozens of other textile items that modern life tends to throw casually into a machine and forget. There is no washing machine humming obediently in the corner for you. Laundry work demands water, heat, soap, physical effort, space, drying time, and careful organisation. Fabric may be soaked, scrubbed, boiled where appropriate, rinsed, wrung, dried, pressed, folded, then sorted so that everything returns to the correct room, department, or person. You lift a damp sheet in your imagination. It is heavy. Now multiply it by a castle. Suddenly, the phrase royal laundry sounds less charming. One small but revealing detail from 19th century domestic practice is the importance of marking household linen. Initials, numbers, or other identifying marks can help large establishments keep track of textiles through repeated washing and storage. It is not glamorous. It is extremely sensible. Lose one embroidered handkerchief, and perhaps nobody notices. Lose 20 sheets, and someone with keys at her waist is going to develop questions. Storage itself becomes an art. Great houses need spaces for linen, china, glass, silver, food, candles, fuel, cleaning materials, spare furniture, and countless other supplies. Some items are everyday necessities, others are expensive enough to require controlled access. Keys matter again. A senior servant responsible for stores may carry authority quite literally at the waist. The image is wonderfully Victorian. Power upstairs wears jewels, power downstairs jingles. You continue through a passage where the wall feels cool when you brush your fingers against it. Damp is another persistent concern in old buildings. Thick masonry can retain moisture. Ventilation varies. Kitchens, washing, human occupancy, fires, and weather all alter the internal atmosphere. Exactly how uncomfortable individual service spaces were at Windsor in 1861 is difficult to reconstruct. Renovation records tell us about structural changes, while household documentation reveals staffing and expenses, but temperature, smell, noise, and personal comfort rarely survive neatly on paper. The servants themselves would have known every troublesome corner. The stair that becomes slippery, the passage that feels freezing in winter, the cupboard where damp threatens linen. The door that sticks, the room where smoke draws badly. Buildings become intimate through work. A maid may understand the practical personality of Windsor better than a guest who has admired its rooms for decades. You hear scrubbing nearby. Floors demand attention too. Stone can be swept and washed. Wood needs care. Carpets require cleaning without the convenience of a modern vacuum cleaner. Various carpet sweeping devices exist by this period, but much cleaning still depends upon brushes, brooms, beating, and patient human effort. Dust refuses to respect monarchy, neither do insects. Victorian households must contend with moths, flies, fleas, mice, and other unwanted residents. Different methods are used to discourage them, some practical, some unpleasant, and some based upon beliefs that would make a modern pest controller quietly leave the room. There is something reassuring about this. Even Queen Victoria cannot issue a royal command abolishing moths. You turn another corner. The smell changes again. Wood, oil, metal. Maintenance extends beyond cleaning. Furniture breaks. Hinges need attention. Locks fail. Paint deteriorates. Plaster cracks. Chimneys require care. Hundreds of windows, doors, fireplaces, pieces of furniture, and mechanical fittings create endless opportunities for something to go wrong. Craftsmen and specialist workers therefore enter Windsor's daily ecosystem alongside permanent household staff. The castle is never finished, it is maintained. That distinction matters above you. Visitors see permanence down here. Permanence looks suspiciously like a list of repairs. You pause beside a narrow staircase as two workers pass. There is barely room. You press toward the wall. No bowing, no grand ceremony. Just practical negotiation over who is carrying the heavier object, for a moment. Windsor feels less like a palace and more like a ship. Everyone has a route. Everyone has a task. Supplies move inward. Waste moves outward. Messages travel between levels. Heat must be produced, food must be distributed, rooms must be maintained, and the entire structure depends upon hundreds of ordinary actions happening at roughly the correct time. You think again of those magnificent state apartments. Their silence now seems almost suspicious. You know what lies behind it. Scrubbing, carrying, sorting, repairing, polishing, climbing, and heating. Especially heating, because the chill in this passage is beginning to settle into your hands. You rub them together, somewhere above. Fireplaces glow warmly beneath portraits and carved mantelpieces. Down here, you can feel how difficult that warmth is to create. And as you climb toward the occupied rooms again, you begin to notice every draught slipping beneath a door, every smoky fireplace, every heavy curtain drawn against cold glass. Winter inside Windsor is waiting for you, and Victorian technology is about to discover just how stubborn an ancient castle can be when asked to stay warm. The cold follows you upstairs. It creeps through the stone beneath your feet and seems to linger around doorways, windows, and corners where no fire quite manages to reach. Windsor may look magnificent from outside, but ancient castles were not originally designed according to the modern principle that every room should feel pleasantly warm while you wander around wearing thin socks. You enter an occupied chamber and immediately understand the Victorian solution. Fire. A coal fire burns in the grate, glowing orange beneath the mantelpiece. Its warmth reaches your face first. You move closer, extending your hands. Wonderful. Then you take several steps backward. Less wonderful. Another few steps and winter begins reclaiming you. This unevenness is part of everyday heating in a huge 19th century residence. Fireplaces provide strong local warmth, but they struggle to heat large spaces evenly. High ceilings, thick masonry, broad windows, long corridors, and frequent doorways all conspire against comfort. Windsor has been substantially modernised by Victoria's time, yet its basic structure remains a collection of buildings shaped by centuries of construction. No amount of royal authority can order medieval stone to develop insulating properties, so fires multiply. Bedrooms need them, sitting rooms need them, working rooms need them. Grand rooms may require several sources of heat depending upon their size and use. Every additional fire means more coal carried upward and more ash carried away. You remember those service passages. Now the connection is obvious. Comfort upstairs produces labour downstairs. Heavy curtains provide another defence. You touch the thick fabric beside a tall window. Curtains help reduce the sensation of cold glass and limit drafts after dark. Carpets and upholstered furniture soften rooms further. While screens can sometimes protect occupants from unwanted currents of air, Victorians become extremely creative when confronted with drafts. There are curtains, screens, door coverings, heavy clothing, foot warmers, bed warmers. And, when all else fails, the ancient technique of sitting extremely close to the fireplace while insisting everything is perfectly comfortable. Fresh air creates a complication. 19th century thinking about health increasingly emphasizes ventilation. Stagnant or foul air is widely associated with disease. Although medical understanding of infection remains incomplete, the germ theory of disease is only beginning to gain stronger scientific foundations. Louis Pasteur's experiments during these years are helping demonstrate the role of microorganisms. But British medical practice has not yet entered the later age of widespread bacteriological understanding. Many people still think in terms influenced by miasma, the belief that foul-smelling air can produce illness. So you face a delightful Victorian dilemma. Keep the window closed and the room may feel stuffy and unhealthy. Open it and February personally enters the castle. You choose the fire. The fire responds by smoking slightly. Chimneys require good draft to function properly, and fireplaces can sometimes send smoke back into rooms depending upon wind. Chimney design, maintenance, and pressure differences within the building. Coal smoke has a distinctive presence. You smell it on the air. It settles onto surfaces. Outside, it rises from chimneys and joins the haze increasingly characteristic of Victorian towns and cities. Windsor is greener than industrial London, but it does not exist outside Britain's smoke-filled age. Then daylight begins weakening. Heating is only half the problem. You also need to see for centuries. Windsor relied heavily upon candles, fireplaces, and oil lamps after sunset during the 19th century. Gas lighting transforms important parts of domestic and urban life, and Windsor participates in that technological transition. Gas offers brighter illumination than traditional candles. It can make large interiors dramatically easier to light. It also brings pipes, fittings, flames, odours, heat, and another set of maintenance concerns. Walk into a well-illuminated Victorian room in the evening, and you may be impressed by its brilliance compared with the earlier generations. Stay long enough, and you may notice the temperature rising. Gas flames consume oxygen and produce combustion products. In crowded rooms, the combination of people, fires, and lighting can make the atmosphere surprisingly heavy. Your beautiful royal evening begins to feel faintly baked. There is an amusing contradiction here. Victorians celebrate brighter interiors, then discover that the brighter interiors require more ventilation, which allows in colder air, which encourages stronger fires, which require more coal. Progress has created a small domestic circle. Candles remain useful. Their softer light survives in bedrooms, passages, and situations where gas is unavailable or inappropriate. You watch a servant prepare one. The wick matters. So does the quality of wax or other candle material. Earlier generations often used tallow candles made from animal fat, which could smell unpleasant and smoke badly. Wealthier households had long preferred cleaner burning wax candles for important spaces. By the 19th century, developments in candle manufacture provide additional options, including stearin and paraffin products. Even something as simple as candlelight has its technological history and its etiquette. Imagine a grand evening room filled with dozens of flames reflecting from mirrors and polished surfaces. It sounds romantic. Now, imagine being responsible for lighting them, then extinguishing them, then dealing with wax. Romance has once again hired staff. A particularly curious domestic object appears when you consider bedtime. Before slipping beneath cold sheets, people sometimes use warming pans filled with hot embers, carefully passed between the bedclothes to remove the chill. Done correctly, the bed becomes inviting. Done incorrectly, you have invented a surprisingly efficient method of setting your bedroom on fire. Other warming devices use hot water or heated materials more safely. You suddenly feel affectionate toward your ordinary blanket. The beds themselves may carry substantial curtains and coverings, partly inherited from older traditions and partly useful for creating a more enclosed sleeping environment. Fabric traps warmth. It also traps dust. Every solution seems to create another servant's task. As evening approaches, you notice the castle changing character. During daylight, windows connect rooms with the outside landscape. After sunset, glass becomes black. The interior world closes inward. Fires brighten, lamps appear, gas flames glow where installed. Shadows gather beneath furniture and in distant corners. Footsteps become easier to hear. The round tower and exterior walls disappear into darkness beyond the windows for someone living here permanently. This rhythm becomes ordinary. What remains less certain is exactly how individuals judged the castle's comfort against other elite Victorian residences. Personal letters occasionally complain about cold rooms in great houses, but expectations differed enormously. A temperature that sends you searching for a radiator might have inspired a Victorian merely to request another shawl. Human beings adapt remarkably well, especially when complaining changes nothing. You stand beside the fire again. Its warmth is pleasant now. The room smells faintly of coal, fabric, and wax. A clock ticks, somewhere farther away. A door closes. Then you hear voices approaching. Immediately, posture changes. A servant becomes attentive. Someone adjusts position. The atmosphere shifts almost imperceptibly, because physical comfort is only one challenge inside Windsor. The harder challenge is social comfort. You may have survived the cold corridor. You may have avoided setting your crinoline on fire. You may even have learned which staircase belongs to you, but now you must face something far more dangerous. Etiquette. Who enters first? How deeply should you bow? When may you speak? Where should you stand? Can you sit? Should you wear gloves? And what happens when Queen Victoria herself walks into the room? The fire crackles behind you as the door begins to open. Suddenly, the cold seems like the easy part. The door opens, and every instinct tells you to look. Victorian etiquette tells you to behave yourself. A small adjustment passes through the room. Conversation softens. Bodies straighten. A servant who appeared relaxed a moment ago becomes almost architectural. You realise that etiquette at Windsor is not simply a collection of charming old customs, it is navigation. If you understand the rules, the castle becomes readable. If you do not, every doorway presents an opportunity to embarrass yourself in front of someone whose family owns several palaces. The first lesson is simple. Rank matters. British society in 1861 is intensely conscious of social position, and the royal court concentrates that awareness into an unusually formal environment. Titles, offices, family connections, military rank, seniority, and relationship to the sovereign can all affect how people are treated. Who enters before whom may matter. Who is presented first may matter. Where someone stands may matter. Even the order in which people move through a doorway can carry meaning. You briefly consider remaining permanently in the corridor. Unfortunately, corridors have rules too. When meeting Queen Victoria formally, you do not greet her as though she's an acquaintance encountered beside the village bakery. Men bow. Women curtsy. The precise form depends upon circumstances, period, and status. But bodily gestures visibly acknowledge the sovereign's position. You practice a bow. Too shallow and you look careless. Too deep and you appear to be searching for a dropped coin. Somewhere between the two lies monarchy. A curtsy requires its own balance and coordination, especially when performed in a wide Victorian skirt. You bend carefully. The crinoline shifts. For one terrible second. The laws of physics threaten the British Constitution. You recover. Nobody applauds. That is probably success. Conversation brings another set of expectations. The sovereign traditionally guides the encounter. You should not dominate discussion or behave with excessive familiarity. Forms of address matter, particularly during formal presentation. Court etiquette is not entirely frozen. However, Victoria's court develops its own character, shaped by the Queen's personality, Albert's influence, changing social expectations, and the family's preference for a more domestic public image than some earlier royal courts. This does not make Windsor casual. It merely means formality has different shades. A private family gathering may feel relatively relaxed. An official reception does not. The surviving accounts of court life reveal both stiffness and warmth, depending upon the observer. Some visitors remember Victoria as capable of lively conversation and laughter. Others find court occasions intimidating or exhausting. That variation makes sense. Imagine being presented to the Queen while thinking continuously about your hands. Where should they go? Are they doing something strange? Why do hands suddenly feel like such suspicious objects? Gloves help. For upper-class Victorians, gloves are deeply embedded in respectable dress. Different occasions call for different styles, and clean gloves contribute to a polished appearance. They also provide somewhere for your nervous hands to hide. Introductions require management as well. You cannot simply wander toward an important person and announce yourself. Court presentations follow procedures, and access to the sovereign is controlled through household structures. This gatekeeping protects Victoria's time and reinforces hierarchy. The closer you approach the centre of monarchy, the fewer movements are accidental. Invitations carry similar weight. Being invited to a royal event is not merely receiving a pleasant suggestion for Thursday evening. It is social recognition. Dress requirements may be specified or understood. Arrival time matters. The nature of the occasions determines behaviour, and lateness is dangerous. Modern life has taught you to send a message saying, "Sorry, traffic." Victorian court life offers fewer convenient escapes. You cannot text the Queen. You cannot blame your phone battery. You can blame the horses, perhaps. Although the horses may privately resent this, at dinner, hierarchy becomes beautifully visible. Formal seating arrangements are carefully considered. Rank and precedence influence who sits where and who accompanies whom. The dining table therefore becomes a map of social order disguised beneath flowers and silver. You sit, or rather, You wait until sitting is appropriate. This is the important difference. Timing protects you. Observe others. Move when they move. Stop when they stop. It is the oldest survival technique available to confused guests. Meals themselves require controlled behaviour. Table manners among elite Victorians are increasingly elaborate, and dining equipment can include specialised utensils for particular foods. The 19th century develops a remarkable enthusiasm for purpose-specific objects: fish knives, dessert implements, serving pieces, different glasses, different plates. You look down at the arrangement before you. There are too many forks. Your future depends upon cutlery. A useful principle is to follow the sequence provided and watch experienced diners. But even that assumes you can observe discreetly while maintaining conversation and not accidentally drinking from somebody else's glass. Royal dinner suddenly feels like an examination with soup. There is a wonderfully peculiar world of court dress behind these occasions too. At the most formal events, older ceremonial styles can survive long after ordinary fashion has moved elsewhere. Court regulations preserve particular garments, decorations, uniforms, feathers, trains, and accessories, because monarchy loves tradition almost as much as tradition loves making people uncomfortable. Certain ceremonial conventions seem almost suspended outside normal fashion. A gentleman who dresses sensibly elsewhere may suddenly find himself wearing something inherited from another era, because the court has decided history looks better indoors. Questions remain about how strictly every minor rule was enforced in every private setting at Windsor. Memoirs sometimes describe surprisingly relaxed moments around the royal family, while official court regulations suggest formidable formality. The simplest explanation may be that Windsor contains both worlds, and experienced insiders know exactly when one becomes the other. You do not, so you continue watching. Servants face their own etiquette. A footman must understand when to enter, where to stand, how to carry objects, and when to withdraw. Personal attendants learn the preferences of those they serve. The best service is often silent. No unnecessary interruption, no staring, no visible reaction. That last requirement becomes particularly interesting. Imagine witnessing a family disagreement involving some of the most famous people in Europe. Your face must say nothing. You become wallpaper with excellent posture. Discretion is essential because servants occupy spaces outsiders cannot access. They see people tired, irritated, ill, affectionate, worried, and occasionally ridiculous. The court survives partly because everyone understands which observations remain private. You move into another room, a visitor waits to be received, clothing has been checked, names are confirmed, the sequence is understood. There is tension beneath the politeness, not terror, simply awareness. A royal encounter can matter socially and professionally. A favourable impression may be remembered, so may an unfortunate one, and Victorian society has an impressive appetite for gossip. A tiny mistake can travel faster than you expect. Perhaps you bow awkwardly. Perhaps you address someone incorrectly. Perhaps you speak too freely. By dinner, several people may know. By tomorrow. Your embarrassment has acquired decorative details that never happened. No internet required. You think again about the castle itself. Its architecture teaches the same lesson as its etiquette. Some doors are yours, others are not. Some rooms invite you forward, others require permission. Some people may speak first, others wait. Windsor is governed by invisible boundaries as much as stone ones. Then a sound from outside breaks the tension. Hooves. A carriage. Voices in a courtyard. The castle is receiving someone else. Perhaps an official. Perhaps a guest. Perhaps a tradesman. Perhaps another person about to discover the terrifying complexity of royal forks. You move toward the window. Below. Windsor is alive with arrivals and departures. Guards watch the entrances. Horses wait. Carriages roll across stone. Messengers pass between worlds. The castle may be protected by walls, but it is never sealed from the country beyond them. And once you begin watching everything that enters and leaves, you discover just how busy a royal fortress can become. From the window, the courtyard looks almost like a stage that never closes. A carriage enters beneath the stone arch. Hooves strike the ground in a steady rhythm. Harness fittings jingle. Wheels rumble across the uneven surface, and a groom moves forward before the vehicle is completely settled. Nearby, a sentry remains at his post. Someone carries a parcel toward an entrance. Another figure disappears around a corner after the carefully controlled rooms you have just left. The movement outside feels wonderfully alive. Windsor Castle may be a royal residence, but it is also a place of constant traffic. People arrive, people leave, letters arrive, food arrives, coal arrives, horses need moving, officials require admission, visitors need guiding, and guards must somehow determine which of these people belong where. You step into the courtyard and hear the castle from a different perspective. Inside, thick walls soften sound. Outside, everything rebounds from stone, boots, hooves, voices, wheels, a distant bell, the clatter from a stable area. Even an ordinary arrival announces itself. Carriages remain essential to royal mobility in 1861. The railway has transformed longer journeys, but trains do not eliminate horses. Instead, Victorian transport becomes a layered system. You might travel quickly between London and Windsor by rail, then complete part of the journey by carriage. Royal coaches range from practical vehicles used for everyday movement to highly formal state carriages reserved for ceremonial occasions. For ordinary castle life, horses remain everywhere. They pull carriages, they carry riders, they require feeding, grooming, watering, exercising, shoeing, cleaning, and medical attention. A horse is not transportation that can be switched off overnight. You follow a groom toward the stables, the smell reaches you immediately. Hay, leather, warm animal, damp straw, manure. After rooms scented with wax and polished furniture, it is refreshingly honest. The royal stables employ skilled workers who understand individual animals and their temperaments. Grooms clean coats, inspect hooves, maintain tack, prepare horses for riding or harness, and notice small signs of illness or injury. Farriers deal with shoes and hoof care. Coachmen require expertise too. Driving a team of powerful horses while controlling a heavy carriage is not a decorative occupation. It demands judgment. Road conditions vary, weather matters, horses become frightened, wheels break, and if your passenger happens to be the Queen. The horse seemed nervous is not the explanation you hope to provide after arriving in a hedge. Victoria herself is familiar with carriage travel and riding, although her preferences change over her lifetime. The royal family's movements require planning. Attendants, vehicles, animals, and security. You begin to see every departure as an operation. Meanwhile, soldiers give Windsor another rhythm entirely. The castle's military identity reaches back through centuries, and guards remain part of its living presence. Sentries protect entrances and important areas. Guard duties follow routines of watches, reliefs, inspections, and discipline. The famous visual association between British monarchy and uniformed guards is not merely decorative theatre. Royal residences require security, even if 19th century methods differ greatly from modern protective arrangements. Queen Victoria has personal reasons to take threats seriously. By 1861, she has survived several attempts or apparent attempts against her life. Beginning with Edward Oxford's attack in 1840, when he fired pistols toward Victoria and Albert as they rode in a carriage. Neither was injured. Other incidents followed during the 1840s and 1850s. The monarch is therefore a public symbol, but also a person who knows that public appearances can carry risk. You look again at the sentry. His stillness feels different now, yet guard duty contains long stretches of something less dramatic. Waiting, standing, watching, Cold feet, rain, more waiting. Military romance tends to omit the impressive quantity of standing involved, then bells begin sounding. Windsor is filled with bells serving different purposes. Some regulate household activity, others belong to the religious life centred upon St George's Chapel. The sound travels beautifully across stone for residents. Bells help divide the day. They call, warn, mark, summon, remind, before wristwatches become universal and long before phones vibrate in pockets. Communities depend more heavily upon shared audible signals. The castle tells time aloud. Another carriage arrives. This one carries visitors. Windsor already attracts public curiosity during Victoria's reign. Access to royal spaces is controlled, naturally, but the castle has long possessed ceremonial and historical importance that draws travellers. The growth of railways makes visiting easier for an expanding middle class. Tourism itself is changing. Guidebooks become increasingly important during the 19th century. Railway excursions allow people to reach historic sites more conveniently, while improved printing spreads information about what travellers ought to see. The idea of standing inside a royal castle has powerful appeal. You can understand why. A visitor arrives expecting romance, ancient walls, royal apartments, famous paintings, perhaps a glimpse of someone important. What the visitor probably does not imagine is the chamber pot being carried away before breakfast. You now possess dangerous levels of backstage knowledge. One charming curiosity of 19th century sightseeing is the popularity of descriptive guidebooks that tell travellers not only where to go, but what they should admire once they arrive. Imagine needing a book to inform you that a magnificent painted ceiling is magnificent, very efficient. Visitors are not the only outsiders entering Windsor. Tradespeople and suppliers form a less glamorous stream. A household this large consumes constantly. Food must arrive fresh. Wine and other beverages require supply. Fuel comes in quantity. Household goods wear out. Animals need feed. Repairs require materials. Messages and parcels move between the castle and the outside world. The exact balance between local suppliers and larger commercial networks changes according to the commodity, contracts, and household arrangements. Records show the royal establishment tied into both nearby economies and wider Victorian systems of production. For Windsor town, the presence of the court has obvious economic consequences. Royal residents require goods and services. Visitors spend money. Officials and servants participate in local life. The boundary between castle and town may look impressive in stone, but economically it is porous. Then comes communication. Letters remain enormously important. Victoria writes extensively. Albert writes extensively. Officials write extensively. Victorians in general seem determined to ensure that future archivists never become bored. The introduction of the uniform penny post in 1840 transformed British correspondence by making prepaid postage affordable and standardised. By 1861, letters moved through a national postal system operating with remarkable reach. The electric telegraph adds something even more astonishing. Messages can now travel over long distances with unprecedented speed. Windsor's ancient walls exist inside an information revolution. A political development in London no longer needs to creep toward the castle at horse speed. Urgent news can move electrically. You imagine a medieval king trying to understand this. So the message travels without the messenger. Yes, and nobody is accused of witchcraft? Usually not. Another bell sounds. This one draws your attention toward a different part of the castle. The movement of horses and carriages continues behind you, but the tone changes as you approach the precincts surrounding St George's Chapel. Here, Windsor's daily activity intersects with something older and quieter. Soldiers guard the sovereign. Servants maintain the household. Officials carry government business, but clergy maintain another continuity: prayer, music, memory. You hear the distant suggestion of voices beneath stone vaulting. The busy courtyard begins to recede. Your footsteps slow naturally, and as you approach the chapel doors, the castle that has seemed like a home, fortress, workplace, stable, and administrative machine prepares to reveal another identity, a sacred place built among the tombs of kings. The courtyard sounds soften behind you. Hooves become distant. Carriage wheels disappear. Even the voices seem to lower themselves as you approach St. George's Chapel, as though the stones surrounding the building have quietly asked Windsor to behave. You step inside. The first sensation is space. The ceiling rises into an intricate stone vault. Tall windows filter daylight into softer colours. Carved wood, monuments, heraldic decoration, and generations of accumulated memory surround you. Then comes the silence, not complete silence or a cough, the movement of fabric, a foot shifting against stone, the faint rustle of a page, but compared with the kitchens, stables, courtyards, and service passages you have crossed, the chapel feels like another world. Religion is not an occasional decoration in Victoria's household. It forms part of the structure of respectable 19th century life, and the Queen takes her Christian faith seriously. Prince Albert does too, although both belong to a century in which religion is being challenged, defended, reconsidered, and reshaped by scientific discovery and social change. In 1861, one particularly unsettling book is still fresh in public conversation. Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species appeared only 2 years earlier, in 1859. Its argument for evolution through natural selection is provoking intense discussion about nature, creation, science, and humanity's place in the world. The familiar story that Victorian Britain instantly divided into believers and unbelievers is far too simple. Religious people respond to evolutionary ideas in many different ways. Some reject them. Others attempt to reconcile new science with Christian belief inside this medieval chapel. Those vast questions seem temporarily far away. The service begins, voices rise, music fills the stone. St. George's Chapel has a long choral tradition, and its choir forms an important part of worship. Human voices behave differently beneath high vaulting. Notes linger after the singers release them. Blending gently in the air, you listen. For once, nobody is polishing anything near you, at least not at this precise moment. The chapel belongs to the College of St. George, a religious community with roots stretching back to the 14th century. Edward III established the college in connection with the Order of the Garter, and the chapel that surrounds you was begun later, under Edward IV in 1475. Construction continued across decades. The result is one of the great examples of late medieval English Gothic architecture, but to someone living at Windsor, it is not merely an architectural masterpiece. It is a functioning place of worship. Clergy serve here, choristers sing here, prayers are spoken here, royal ceremonies unfold here, people are baptized, married, remembered, and buried within this sacred geography. The connection with the Order of the Garter gives the chapel another layer of identity, founded by Edward III in the 14th century. The Garter is Britain's oldest surviving order of chivalry. Its spiritual home is here at St. George's. You notice heraldic emblems associated with its knights. Banners and insignia transform individual membership into visual spectacle. Each knight occupies a place within a tradition far older than Victoria's reign, and then you encounter perhaps the most famous phrase associated with the order, Honi soit qui mal y pense, Old French, usually rendered as something close to shame on him who thinks evil of it. There are several stories explaining why Edward III chose those words. The most colourful involves a lady losing a garter during a courtly gathering, after which the king supposedly picked it up and rebuked those who laughed. It is a wonderful story. It is also almost certainly impossible to verify. The tale appears in later forms and may tell you more about the human appetite for entertaining origins than about the actual founding of the order. History occasionally hands you a magnificent anecdote and then quietly removes the receipt. You move farther into the chapel. Here the dead are never very far away. Windsor contains royal burials spanning centuries. Edward IV lies here. So does Henry VI, whose remains were transferred to Windsor after his death. Henry VIII is buried beneath the choir alongside Jane Seymour, the third of his 6 wives. You pause. Henry VIII's tomb is surprisingly modest compared with the monumental project he once imagined for himself. He planned something far grander. Death, however, is excellent at ignoring architectural ambition. Charles the Urn is also buried here after his execution in 1649. Think about that for a moment. A Victorian queen worships in a chapel containing the remains of a king executed after civil war. The monarchy surrounding Victoria may appear stable, but Windsor's tombs provide reminders that British kingship has survived rebellion, deposition, imprisonment, religious conflict, revolution, and execution. The stones are full of warnings. Perhaps that is one reason continuity feels so powerful here. Victoria does not need a history lesson written on paper. She can walk through one. You sit quietly as the service continues. For household staff, chapel attendants can intersect with rank and duty in complicated ways. Royal worship is both personal devotion and public institution. Seating, attendance, ceremonial position, and access reflect the wider organisation of the court. Even prayer does not completely dissolve hierarchy. Yet sound crosses those boundaries. The same anthem reaches royal ears and servants' ears. The same cold stone sits beneath everyone. The same winter darkness waits outside. There is something gently levelling about that. The religious atmosphere of Victoria's family is shaped strongly by ideas of duty, morality, providence, and domestic virtue. Albert's seriousness fits naturally within that world, but private belief is difficult to measure. Official behaviour tells you when someone attends worship. Letters may reveal spiritual anxiety, journals record grief or gratitude. None of these gives perfect access to the silent thoughts of a person sitting through a service. Perhaps Victoria listens closely. Perhaps one of the children becomes distracted. Perhaps a servant worries about unfinished work. Perhaps somebody is simply cold. Human minds have always wandered in sacred buildings. Yours does too. Your eyes rise toward the architecture. Stone ribs spread across the ceiling like branches. Light moves slowly across carved surfaces. There is an extraordinary contrast between the delicacy of the design and the weight holding it above you. Then the choir reaches another passage. You stop thinking. You simply listen. The voices swell and settle. For a few minutes, Windsor's machinery seems suspended. No trays, no coal buckets, no carriage schedules, no questions about precedence. Only breath becoming music, eventually. The service moves toward its end. People rise, clothing rustles, the quiet spell loosens. You step outside again and ordinary life begins returning almost immediately. A servant crosses in the distance. A guard shifts position. Smoke rises above the roofs. Someone is expected somewhere. The castle resumes, yet the chapel follows you. Its tombs have reminded you that royal life, however protected, remains mortal. That thought is particularly uncomfortable in 1861, because elsewhere in Windsor, doctors still work with limited knowledge, diseases remain poorly understood, and even wealth cannot guarantee recovery once serious illness enters a household. You have already watched fires fight the cold. Now another invisible threat waits in water. Food, air, and human contact. And before this year is finished, medicine will be asked to save the man at the centre of a Victoria's world. It will not succeed. You leave the chapel carrying an uncomfortable awareness that the castle's thick walls protect against many things, but not against illness. A guard can stop an intruder. A locked door can protect private rooms. Heavy curtains can keep out part of the winter draught. But bacteria do not ask permission to enter Windsor, unfortunately. Nobody around you fully understands bacteria yet. That makes becoming ill in 1861 a strangely uncertain experience. Whether you sleep beneath a leaking cottage roof or beneath embroidered blankets in a royal apartment, money helps. Of course it does. Inside Windsor, you can summon respected physicians, you can rest in clean linen, eat nourishing food, remain warm, receive constant nursing, and avoid the exhausting labour expected from poorer Victorians. What wealth cannot provide is 21st century medicine. There are no antibiotics. No modern blood tests, no x-rays, no reliable understanding of many infections, no intensive care unit waiting quietly behind another corridor. Diagnosis depends heavily upon observation. Your doctor asks questions. Where does it hurt? When did the fever begin? Are you sleeping? Are you eating? What does your pulse feel like? What has happened with your digestion? Then comes examination, interpretation, and a medical judgment shaped by the knowledge of the period. Some treatments help, others do very little. A few may make matters considerably worse. You suddenly become highly motivated not to cough. Victorian medicine in 1861 stands in an interesting transitional moment. Anesthesia has already transformed surgery. Ether was publicly demonstrated as a surgical anaesthetic in the 1840s, and chloroform soon followed. Queen Victoria herself helped make chloroform famous. During the birth of Prince Leopold in 1853, physician John Snow administered chloroform to reduce her labour pain. She received it again during the birth of Princess Beatrice in 1857. The Queen's approval helped weaken some of the moral resistance surrounding pain relief in childbirth. Imagine that small medical scene. A monarch breathes an anaesthetic. Doctors observe carefully. Then society discovers that perhaps agony does not always build character after all. John Snow is important for another reason. During the 1854 cholera outbreak in London's Soho district, he famously connected cases with water from the Broad Street pump. His work supports the idea that cholera spreads through contaminated water rather than poisonous air. Yet the wider medical world does not immediately abandon older theories. Miasma remains influential. Smell matters enormously to Victorian ideas about health. A foul odour is suspicious. Fresh air is desirable. Drainage attracts increasing attention. Ventilation becomes almost a moral virtue. Open that window. Let the healthy air enter. Try not to mention that the healthy air is approximately the temperature of a disappointed ghost. At Windsor, sanitation has improved considerably from earlier centuries. The castle underwent major modernisation during the 19th century, including improvements to domestic services and plumbing, water closets, drainage systems, water supply, and bathing facilities are increasingly incorporated into elite residences. Still, modernisation occurs unevenly. An ancient castle is not a blank sheet of paper. Pipes must negotiate old walls. Drains must go somewhere. Water has to remain clean. Waste has to leave. And every improvement introduces another system requiring maintenance. One unexpectedly revealing Victorian obsession is the fear of sewer gases, because disease is often associated with foul air. Householders worry that dangerous vapours might travel through drains into buildings. Sometimes their concern points toward genuine sanitation problems. Even when the explanation is wrong, the nose becomes an unofficial medical instrument. If something smells terrible, investigate it. Not the worst rule humanity has invented. Water quality presents a more serious danger. Typhoid fever, cholera, and other diseases can spread through contaminated water or food. People may drink something that looks perfectly harmless while ingesting organisms invisible to the eye. That invisible mechanism makes outbreaks difficult to understand without germ theory. By the early 1860s, scientific work in Europe is moving steadily toward a microbial understanding of disease. But the revolution is incomplete. Louis Pasteur is demonstrating that microorganisms play roles in fermentation and decay. The implications are enormous. The castle does not yet know how enormous. You enter a bedroom prepared for someone feeling unwell. The curtains are partly adjusted. A fire burns. Water waits nearby. Medicine bottles may stand on a table. The atmosphere becomes hushed. Nursing is intimate work. A patient needs washing, feeding, comforting, observing, and sometimes helping with the most private bodily needs in royal surroundings. Attendants and nurses may work alongside physicians while trying to preserve dignity and quiet. Fever changes everything. A person who commanded rooms yesterday may today struggle simply to sit upright. Rank cannot negotiate with temperature. Treatment varies according to symptoms and medical opinion. Doctors might recommend rest, changes in diet, cooling measures, stimulants, purgatives, tonics, or various medicines. Opium-based preparations remain widely used for pain and other complaints. Alcohol can appear medicinally as wine or brandy. Mercury compounds have not entirely disappeared from practice either. Despite their potential toxicity, the Victorian medicine cabinet is not a place for adventurous snacking. Dental care offers its own reasons for anxiety. Dentistry is becoming increasingly professionalized. But tooth decay and infection remain common problems. Extraction is often the final answer to severe dental pain. Artificial teeth are available for those who can afford them, made from several materials. Earlier in the century, dentures sometimes incorporated real human teeth, including teeth obtained from battlefields and other sources. By 1861, porcelain teeth and improved dental manufacturing are increasingly important. But the memory of so-called Waterloo teeth remains part of the century's wonderfully unsettling medical landscape. You decide to brush very carefully. Then there are diseases that enter households despite every precaution: measles, scarlet fever, tuberculosis, influenza, typhoid. Children are particularly vulnerable. Even privileged families experience repeated sickness and loss. Victoria and Albert's children receive excellent care by contemporary standards, but their parents still live with fears familiar to families across Britain. A fever can become dangerous, a cough can linger, a minor complaint can change. Medical records may tell later generations what doctors believed was happening, but retrospective diagnosis is hazardous. Symptoms described in letters can fit several illnesses, and 19th century disease labels do not always correspond neatly with modern categories. This uncertainty will become especially important with Albert. The traditional diagnosis of his final illness is typhoid fever. For generations, that explanation is repeated confidently. Later medical writers question it. Some point toward the length of his declining health before the final crisis, and suggest possibilities including chronic abdominal disease or cancer. Others defend typhoid as compatible with the reported symptoms. You cannot settle the question from this corridor. Neither can the surviving evidence settle it completely. That is part of history's frustration. You know Albert will die. You do not get to run a modern test. For now. The bedroom before you belongs only to an imagined patient. Someone adjusts the fire. Another person carries fresh water. A physician speaks quietly, outside the room. Ordinary castle life continues. Dinner still needs preparing. Guards still change duty. Letters still arrive. Children still require lessons. Illness creates a small private world inside the larger household. And eventually, if the patient improves, the door opens again. Normal life returns. You step away. Evening is beginning to gather around Windsor now. The day's formal work slowly loosens its grip. Lamps are prepared, clothing changes again, dinner approaches, music waits, books open, conversation replaces correspondence. After the coal, bells, lessons, etiquette, and medical anxieties of the day, the royal family moves toward its hours of leisure, although, as you are about to discover, even relaxing at Windsor requires doing it properly. By evening, Windsor begins changing its clothes again. So do you. The practical garments of daytime give way to evening dress, and once more the Victorian wardrobe reminds you that comfort is merely one consideration among many. Servants move through bedrooms with fresh clothing. Hair is adjusted, shoes are checked, jewellery appears, buttons are fastened. For women attending a formal dinner, evening gowns may reveal more of the shoulders and neckline than daytime dresses, while fine fabrics catch beautifully in artificial light. Men exchange daytime coats for clothing appropriate to dinner and evening society. You have spent half the day getting dressed. Now you discover that you were apparently dressed incorrectly for night. Excellent. Somewhere downstairs. Dinner is already being coordinated. But the hours after eating are what interest you now. This is the softer side of Windsor, not completely informal, never completely informal, yet the atmosphere can relax once official business and daytime engagements recede. Victoria and Albert both love music. That matters enormously. Music is not simply something performed at grand public occasions. It belongs to their domestic relationship and family life. Albert is a capable pianist and organist, and he composes. Victoria enjoys singing and playing the piano. You enter a room where music waits in sheets upon a stand. A piano occupies part of the space. Imagine Albert sitting down. The first notes sound. Conversation fades. The instrument fills the room without requiring the enormous ceremonial machinery of court. For a few minutes, nobody needs to discuss politics, nobody needs to arrange precedents, nobody needs to worry about which fork belongs to the fish. You simply listen. Victoria's enthusiasm for performance extends beyond music. She and Albert enjoy theatrical entertainments, tableau, dancing and private performances during their marriage. The court is not the permanently gloomy place later memories of the widowed queen might suggest. There is laughter here. There is dancing. There are costumes. There are evenings when the royal family behaves less like marble statues and more like people trying to amuse themselves after dinner. In earlier years, Victoria herself danced enthusiastically. She enjoys opera too, and musical culture remains an important part of royal life. This is worth remembering because the image most people carry of her comes from much later. Black dress, heavy expression, widow's cap, a face that seems profoundly unimpressed by photography. But the Victoria walking through Windsor in much of 1861 still lives beside Albert. She can laugh loudly. She can enjoy entertainment. She can become excited by music. The widow has not yet replaced the wife. You settle into a drawing room after dinner. The fire is stronger now. Curtains shut out the darkness. Gas or lamps provide illumination. Supplemented where necessary by candles, light reflects from glass, polished furniture, jewellery, and picture frames. The room feels enclosed and intimate despite the castle surrounding it. Conversation begins. This is an entertainment in itself, before radio, television, recorded music, streaming services, and the dangerous modern ritual of checking your phone every 40 seconds. Evenings demand participation. You talk, you read, you play music, you play games, you write letters, you examine albums. You may listen while someone reads aloud. Reading aloud is common in 19th century households. A book, newspaper, letter, or other text can become shared entertainment rather than a private experience. Imagine someone opening a novel. You settle deeper into your chair. The fire clicks. A page turns. The reader begins. Victorian literature gives you plenty of options. Charles Dickens is one of the most famous living writers in Britain. By 1861, readers already know Oliver Twist, David Copperfield, Bleak House, A Tale of Two Cities, and many other works. Great Expectations has just completed its serialised publication in 1861. You could therefore be sitting in Windsor while Pip's story is still fresh in the minds of contemporary readers. William Makepeace Thackeray is alive. Anthony Trollope is publishing. George Eliot has recently produced The Mill on the Floss and Silas Marner. The Victorian world is reading itself into existence. Royal reading habits abroad too. Victoria reads novels, biographies, religious works, newspapers, correspondence, and material connected with official duties. Albert's reading tends to reflect his vast intellectual interests. The children read according to education, age, and parental supervision. Not every book receives parental approval. Some things never change. Games offer another form of entertainment. Cards remain popular in Victorian society. as do various table games and word amusements. Chess is well established. Charades and guessing games can enliven family gatherings. One fashionable pastime of the broader 19th century is the creation of elaborate tableaux vivants, or living pictures, in which participants pose silently to represent famous scenes, artworks, historical moments, or allegorical subjects. Think of it as Victorian television with one frame. You dress everyone in costume, arrange them dramatically, then forbid them to move. Somewhere, a child immediately develops an itchy nose. Private theatricals can become more ambitious, with scenery, costumes, rehearsals, and performances before invited audiences for royal children. These activities offer amusement but also training in confidence, memory, music, and social presentation. Even leisure can acquire educational value under Albert's watch. One detail that surprises many modern listeners is just how visually documented Victoria and Albert's family world becomes. They collect photographs enthusiastically and exchange images with relatives and friends. Albums allow evenings to include the 19th century equivalent of scrolling through family photographs, only much slower, and with considerably more furniture. You might open an album and see relatives scattered across Europe. Photography helps compress distance. A face absent from Windsor can still sit quietly in your hands. Yet the exact emotional atmosphere of these evenings resists reconstruction. Journals and correspondence preserve particular occasions, but an ordinary quiet night may leave almost nothing behind. Was everyone relaxed? Was someone bored? Did Albert continue thinking about unfinished work while music played? Did one of the children silently wish to escape another improving conversation? The room cannot answer. You watch instead. Victoria sits near Albert. A child moves across the room. Someone turns a page. A servant enters almost silently, attends to something, then withdraws. The hierarchy remains. It simply softens around the edges. Dinner itself has reinforced rank. Evening clothing has reinforced rank. The presence of servants reinforces rank. But family intimacy occupies the same space. That combination defines so much of Windsor: home and institution, affection and duty, privacy and observation. A drawing room can contain all four. The fire burns lower. Conversation slows. Perhaps somebody yawns and tries to disguise it. Victorian etiquette has many rules, but the human body continues its quiet rebellion against late evenings. You feel it too. Your shoulders relax. The day's endless corridors begin catching up with you. Outside. The castle has become mostly dark. Windows glow here and there against the enormous black shapes of towers and roofs. Servants continue working. Lamps will eventually be extinguished. Doors will be checked. Bedrooms will be prepared. Tomorrow should resemble today. That is the comforting assumption. But 1861 is running toward winter. Albert is increasingly tired. Family worries are accumulating. Soon. The ordinary pattern you have followed from morning fires to evening music will break. Not dramatically at first. There will be concern, then illness, waiting, medical visits, whispered reports, and finally, in December, the music in Victoria's world will stop. You listen to the final notes fading from the room. Nobody here knows yet how precious this ordinary evening is. The final notes have faded. But winter keeps moving toward Windsor. November passes beneath grey skies. The trees stand increasingly bare. Damp air settles around the stone walls. Fires burn longer, and darkness arrives earlier each afternoon, inside the castle. Familiar routines continue because routines always continue until something forces them to stop. Albert is tired. That is not entirely new. For years he has worked intensely, carrying political, cultural, administrative, and family responsibilities with a seriousness that rarely permits complete rest. During 1861, however, those around him have reasons to notice that his health is not robust. Then comes the trouble involving Bertie. You remember the eldest son whose temperament has caused his parents so much anxiety. While undergoing military training in Ireland, The 20-year-old Prince of Wales becomes involved with Nellie Clifton, a young actress. News of the affair reaches Victoria and Albert, who places enormous importance upon morality and duty. It is deeply upsetting. In late November, already unwell, he travels to Cambridge to speak privately with his son. You cannot enter that conversation. No transcript survives to let you stand invisibly beside father and son. Later retellings give the meeting an almost prophetic quality because Albert has so little time left. Yet memory after bereavement has a way of rearranging earlier moments, giving them meanings nobody could have recognised while living through them. Albert returns, his condition worsens. Now Windsor changes, not suddenly, quietly. The machinery of the household keeps moving, but attention begins gathering around one sick room. Doctors attend him. Messages become more important. Family members watch, servants lower their voices. The ordinary noises you have grown accustomed to continue outside the room. Yet they seem almost inappropriate now. A tray still needs carrying. A fire still needs feeding. A guard still stands outside. Someone still cleans a corridor. Illness does not stop the castle. It creates a second clock inside it, the clock of waiting. Albert develops fever and increasing weakness. On 9th of December, his physicians formally diagnose typhoid fever, a dangerous infectious disease commonly associated with contaminated food or water. For a Victorian household, the diagnosis is frightening but understandable. Typhoid is familiar. What nobody possesses is an antibiotic capable of treating the bacterial infection itself. Care therefore focuses largely upon supporting the patient and responding to symptoms. You enter the atmosphere outside Albert's room. The smell is different. Warm fabric, medicine, coal fire, perhaps food that has barely been touched. The curtains are controlled carefully. Voices remain low. Footsteps become deliberate. Victoria is close. Her dependence upon Albert has always been emotional as well as practical. He is husband, advisor, companion, father of her children, and the person around whom much of her adult private life has been constructed. Now she watches him weaken. There is no monarchy in that feeling, only fear. The children are drawn into the waiting too. Some are present at Windsor, others receive news from a distance. Bertie's position becomes particularly painful because of the recent confrontation with his father. Victoria will later blame her eldest son, at least emotionally, for contributing to Albert's decline. From a modern medical perspective, that direct connection is impossible to establish in the way grief imagined it. Even the diagnosis of typhoid has attracted later questions. Descriptions of Albert's health suggest that he may have experienced abdominal problems and declining strength before the final fever. Various later writers have proposed conditions ranging from chronic intestinal disease to cancer. Typhoid remains a plausible explanation for the final illness, but the evidence cannot provide the clean certainty of a modern medical chart. You are left with symptoms recorded by people who could not know what tests might one day exist inside the room. Albert grows weaker. Time becomes strange. When someone is seriously ill, a day can feel enormous. You measure progress in tiny things. Did he sleep? Did he drink? Is the fever lower? Did the doctor look worried? Has anything changed? Every answer becomes important. Outside, December continues, Christmas is approaching. That fact makes the atmosphere almost cruel. This family has helped popularize an image of royal Christmas filled with decorated trees, gifts, music, children, and domestic warmth. Now the season arrives beneath a shadow. One particularly poignant object associated with Albert's final days is the ordinary domestic world surrounding him. He does not die on a battlefield or during some grand public ceremony. He dies inside Windsor Castle. The setting is royal. The experience is painfully familiar. A family gathers. Doctors can do no more. People hope anyway. On Saturday, 14th of December 1861, Albert reaches his final hours. He is 42. Victoria remains nearby with members of the family. Albert's breathing weakens. The room that has contained so much anxiety becomes very still. At approximately 10:50 in the evening, Prince Albert dies for several seconds. You imagine nothing moving, no political symbolism, no empire, no titles, only absence. Then the reality begins spreading outward. A husband has died, a father has died, a prince has died, the Queen's closest companion has died, and because this is Windsor, private grief immediately acquires public consequences. Messages must be sent, officials informed, the government notified, the wider royal family must hear. News will travel through Britain and beyond. Telegraph wires carry what earlier generations would have waited hours or days to learn. The information age you noticed in the courtyard now performs one of its saddest functions. It makes grief fast, across Britain. Newspapers report the death. Public mourning follows. Albert has not always been universally popular during his life. His German birth and political influence attracted suspicion in earlier years. Death changes public perception dramatically. Expressions of sympathy spread. For Victoria, however, public response is secondary. Her world has collapsed inward. She is 42 years old and will remain a widow for nearly 40 years. Black clothing now becomes something far deeper than ordinary Victorian mourning etiquette. It becomes part of her identity. Rooms associated with Albert are preserved with extraordinary care. His belongings remain meaningful. Memories become ritualized. Victoria continues to invoke him in family and political life long after his death. There is an almost startling domestic detail in the routines that develop afterward, at Windsor and other royal residences. Servants continue preparing aspects of Albert's rooms as though maintaining his presence. Clothes must be laid out, washing water provided, and personal spaces preserved according to established habits. To outsiders, such practices can seem strange, to someone overwhelmed by grief. Routine may offer a way to resist the violence of sudden absence. The castle itself changes with her. Entertainment diminishes. Victoria withdraws substantially from public ceremonial life. The lively wife who enjoyed dancing, music, theatre, and family evenings retreats behind mourning. Criticism will eventually grow over her prolonged absence from many public duties, but that belongs to later years. Tonight, there is only Windsor. The fires still burn, guards still stand, servants still move quietly through corridors, yet everything feels altered. You remember Albert sitting among papers, his concern for the children, his music, his fascination with improvement. The ordinary evening you watched only a short time ago, all of it has become past tense. Outside, winter presses against the windows. Inside, footsteps soften near the rooms of the grieving Queen. Eventually, the castle must sleep, or at least attempt to. And as lamps begin disappearing one by one, you follow Windsor into the first strange nights of a household, learning that someone who shaped every part of its daily rhythm will never walk these corridors again. Night settles over the Windsor differently now. The same towers rise against the December sky. The same guards remain at their posts. The same stone courtyards wait beneath darkness. And the Thames continues moving quietly beyond the town. Yet inside the castle, absence seems to occupy physical space. You walk slowly. There is no reason to hurry any more. Behind you lies the entire day you have spent inside Windsor. Although it feels much longer than a single day now, you remember entering beneath those enormous walls while carriage wheels rolled across stone. You remember the servants waking before daylight, coal carried through hidden passages, ash removed from fireplaces, warm water lifted upstairs. Beds open to the morning, then clothing, buttons, corsets, crinolines, gloves, polished shoes, all those careful layers required simply to become presentable before Victorian society. You remember breakfast travelling from hot kitchens towards silent tables, losing every visible trace of the labour that created it. That pattern now seems to explain the castle itself. What Windsor shows and what Windsor requires are two different things. Visitors see towers, staterooms, paintings. Uniforms, ceremony, royalty. But living here means experiencing everything behind those images: smoke, cold, waiting, work, rules, and endless footsteps. You pass a doorway. A servant appears briefly, carrying something into the darkness. Even after Albert's death, practical life continues. That may be the strangest part of grief inside a working palace. Somebody must still prepare breakfast tomorrow. Horses still require feeding. Fires cannot be allowed to die in occupied rooms simply because the household is mourning. Letters need answering. Doors need guarding. Children need caring for. Death changes everything emotionally while changing almost nothing about the necessity of mourning. Queen Victoria will not simply emerge from this loss after a respectable interval and resume her old life. Albert's death divides her reign. The transformation becomes visible to the entire country. She adopts mourning dress and remains associated with black clothing for the rest of her life. Her withdrawal from many public appearances becomes so pronounced that critics eventually complain about the monarchy's absence from national life. But tonight, none of that future controversy exists yet. There is simply a widow inside a castle, and there are children who have lost their father. You think about Beatrice, only 4 years old. Leopold is 8. The older children understand more clearly what has happened. But understanding does not necessarily make grief easier. Bertie carries an especially complicated burden. Victoria's conviction that the stress surrounding his behaviour contributed to Albert's death damages their relationship. That blame will linger. Families do not become less complicated because historians later place them inside elegant biographies. Sometimes they become more complicated because every painful letter survives. You continue. A lamp burns near the end of a corridor, its flame moves slightly. One peculiar consequence of Victoria's mourning is the preservation of Albert's domestic routines. His rooms at royal residences are kept with remarkable care, and servants continue attending to personal arrangements long after his death. Fresh water can be brought, clothing can be prepared, objects remain where memory expects them. This is not ordinary public mourning. It is grief transformed into household ritual. Whether Victoria experiences these routines primarily as comfort, duty, denial, devotion, or some mixture that changes across the years cannot be reduced to one explanation. Her own words reveal the depth of her attachment, but private grief rarely fits neatly into categories created afterward. Perhaps maintaining the rooms makes Albert feel near. Perhaps changing them would feel like losing him again. You understand enough not to judge. You reach a window. Outside. Windsor town lies beneath the night, somewhere beyond the castle walls. Ordinary families are sleeping in smaller houses. Their beds may be colder, their meals simpler, their medical care far less sophisticated, their clothing cheaper, their futures less protected by money and position, yet in one important sense. The distance between them and the Queen has suddenly narrowed. They can lose someone they love. So can she. A crown does nothing about that. This is perhaps the deepest contradiction of living inside Windsor in 1861. Materially, royal existence is almost unimaginably privileged. There are servants to perform exhausting work, rooms filled with valuable objects, excellent food, fine clothing, horses, carriages, doctors, gardens, music, art, security. But privilege creates its own forms of confinement. You are watched, scheduled, dressed according to expectation, surrounded by hierarchy. Your family life intersects constantly with public duty. Your marriage has constitutional significance. Your children become national figures before they understand what a nation is. Even grief belongs partly to the public. Victoria cannot lose Albert anonymously. Britain watches, Europe watches, newspapers discuss, portraits circulate, memorials will rise. The private emptiness of one bedroom becomes national history. A distant clock marks the hour. You listen to the sound fading through stone. Windsor has heard clocks like this for generations. Kings have died. Queens have died, children have been born, dynasties have changed, wars have begun and ended, the castle remains. That permanence is partly illusion. Of course, Windsor changes constantly. Walls are rebuilt, rooms are redesigned, technology enters, gas replaces older lighting, plumbing improves, telegraphy accelerates communication, railways bring London closer. Even ancient places survive by changing. In 1861, Britain itself is undergoing the same restless transformation. Factories expand, cities grow, scientific ideas challenge old assumptions. The empire stretches across continents. Photography captures faces with unprecedented intimacy. Steam compresses distance, and here, inside a castle founded in the Norman age, people still worry about cold bedrooms and difficult children. History is rarely one grand thing. It is thousands of ordinary things happening beneath grand names. You begin walking toward the sleeping rooms. The castle becomes quieter. A servant extinguishes a light. Another checks a fire. Somewhere, fabric rustles behind a closed door. A guard outside hears the winter wind. Tomorrow, coal will be carried again. Water will arrive. Breakfast will be prepared. Boots will cross courtyards. Bells will ring. But Windsor will never again be exactly the household you entered. Albert is gone. Victoria's long widowhood has begun, and the bright domestic monarchy they created together has entered its shadow. Your footsteps slow. The corridor darkens behind you. For one final moment, you look back through everything Windsor has shown you, not simply how royalty lives, but how hundreds of people labour so royalty can live at all. Then you let the castle settle around you. The fires grow softer, the bells are quiet, the last footsteps disappear. And beneath ancient walls, surrounded by sleeping servants, guards, children, memories, and one newly grieving queen, you finally allow the long Victorian day to end. The castle is almost completely still now. You no longer need to follow anyone. No servant is waiting for you to move aside. No footman is carrying a tray past your shoulder. No tutor is opening another lesson book. And no bell is asking someone to hurry through a corridor. You can simply rest. Outside, winter air moves gently around the towers. The stones remain cold, but the room around you holds the last warmth of the fire. Its glow has faded from orange to red, then darker red, then almost nothing. Perhaps somewhere beyond these walls, the Thames continues beneath the night, moving without ceremony toward places you cannot see. You think of all the lives that have passed through Windsor. Most left no portraits, no monuments, no biographies, a maid carrying water, a groom brushing a horse, a kitchen worker standing beside the heat, a tired guard waiting for morning. For one day, you walked beside them, and now their footsteps can fade. The grand rooms can fade too. The paintings disappear into darkness. The silver loses its shine. The towers become silhouettes. Even Victoria, awake somewhere with a grief too new for sleep, becomes only a quiet figure behind a distant door. Nothing more is required from you tonight. You do not need to remember the names. You do not need to keep track of the dates. Let the details loosen. Let the corridors become softer in your imagination. The castle is still there, safe in the darkness. The final ember settles in the grate. Your breathing becomes slower. The old walls hold their silence, and somewhere far down the corridor, the last lamp goes out. Sleep well, my friend. Tomorrow can wait outside the gates. Sweet dreams.